It all started in the Roman Empire. It was a beautiful day because the girl had a wedding ceremony, and many residents gathered in the church to congratulate and seal this marriage. The priest, who was conducting the ceremony, finally declared the young couple husband and wife. And after this was done, music began to play around, and the guests immediately began to move into the main hall for the ceremony, where they chatted, some even danced. There was also a specially arranged huge feast, which had many different exquisite dishes, and this wedding ceremony was really quite expensive. The guests were pleased with the treats they were given, as well as the drinks that lifted their spirits. Meanwhile, the bride herself was sitting behind her beautiful throne. It was Layla. Now she was the Duchess of Elman. The girl sat and still hadn't eaten anything. She even had some pretty big bags under her eyes. She turned to her assistant Marie and said that she was incredibly hungry. Of course, her assistants immediately became concerned about the lady, but leaning closer to her, she said that she should not have done this. Layla, of course, didn't like all this. She was even more unhappy about it, because she really hadn't eaten for a very long time, and all these smells of food that were present on the table were really testing her patience. Maria really felt very sorry for the lady. She wondered whether the lady, who had lived freely in the remote wilderness before, would be able to withstand such a new life. Looking at that miserable little face that Lady Maria had, she wanted to feed her wholeheartedly, but she had to follow orders and not do it. Then the lady decided to try it anyway, and took a risk, asking if she could at least bite off a piece of lamb. But Maria still refused her even this. She said that the lady herself knew perfectly well that she couldn't do this, and even if she kept asking about it, her decision would not change. Layla then sighed heavily and said that her assistant was too categorical in her decisions. But her assistant said that not everything was over yet. There was something more important than the wedding, so she needed to follow the instructions. As soon as Layla heard about this, she immediately understood that what was being discussed was, of course, the first wedding night, which took place immediately after the wedding. Layla was a fair-haired, blue-eyed, beautiful girl, and her cheeks flushed as soon as she thought about it. In fact, the first wedding night was a sacred and mysterious night that people had to spend while married. It was the main ceremony. After Layla completes her preparations, her husband will come to her bedroom, who swore before God that they were to become spouses. This husband was now Duke Kaya Elmano. He was quite an attractive young man with dark hair and a beautiful, stunning appearance. Even before the main wedding ceremony, Layla was in her room, and her wedding dress was on a mannequin near her bed. That evening, her friend came to see her. Her name was Maleficent, and she smiled and said that no matter how you looked at it, this dress was perfect for Layla. She also said that she had an amazing premonition about how exactly their ceremony was supposed to go, and then her friend smiled and simply looked at her childhood friend. Maleficent, meanwhile, asked if it was true that Layla could not wait for the wedding, because it was a truly grand event in the life of any girl. Well, the girl thoughtfully replied that in fact, she hadn't been expecting it that much. She was overcome more by excitement than by a joyful premonition. Layla explained that her mother died when she was still a child, and no one had ever spoken to her properly about marriage, so she was only taught the ABCs, but did not know the deepest questions. Then her friend suddenly took out a small chest. She sat down next to Layla on the bed and said that she wanted to tell her something important. It could be useful to her. The girl even put aside the book she was reading before going to bed and asked what it was. Smiling happily, she said that she had probably heard about the first wedding night. Layla said that she had heard from her friends, but no one had explained to her in detail what should happen on the night together after the wedding. Then Maleficent suggested that she tell her about it, so that it would not become some kind of surprise or inconvenience for her in the future. Then Maleficent pointed to the keyhole that was on the chest and told Layla that although it was not visible from the outside, there was a deep hole hidden between the woman's legs. After that, she picked up the key and explained that the man had an elongated penis in the same place. She inserted this key into the keyhole and explained to her friend that intimate relations on the first wedding night are when the man's genitals penetrate the woman's opening, and they thus become one. As soon as Layla heard this, she was simply horrified. This story even scared her. After a short silence, she suddenly asked her friend if this really meant that the man's penis was as long as the key that Maleficent showed her. The woman then suddenly laughed and replied that, of course, it was not like that. Usually it was much longer and thicker, and besides all this, there were also small organs in the form of sacs. After this, Maleficent began to tell in detail how it all happened and how exactly the sexual contact took place. At that moment, Layla began to imagine all of this in detail, and she became very scared. But in fact, she did not want this to happen because it all sounded very uncomfortable and even terrible. Of course, she felt uncomfortable, even from the thought that such a large thing could enter her, and that it would have to be repeated many times. Layla now didn't want this wedding night to ever come, but Maleficent saw that the girl was very upset, and immediately said that she should not be afraid of anything, because she saw concern on her face. She said that when Layla experiences this dizzying and delightful feeling, she will want to do it again and again. There was nothing scary about it, only when you do it for the first time. The unknown scares you, but later it is even pleasant. So she asked Layla not to be embarrassed at all, but to simply trust the Duke, who knew exactly what he would have to do. The night before Layla got married, she took a hot bath and immediately thought about showing him her naked body, which made her feel even more uncomfortable. The girl's whole face was red because she thought that he would squeeze her body with his hands. They would kiss, and then what her friend told her about would actually happen. At that moment, Mrs. Marie came in and, seeing her concern, immediately asked if everything was okay with her, since the girl looked really confused. Well, Layla replied that she was really okay, so she didn't have to worry. But the girl was very embarrassed that she had such thoughts. Meanwhile, Marie replied that she still couldn't eat lamb, because if she ate something fatty after fasting, she would immediately feel ill. So after the wedding ceremony, she brought her a light, warm soup so that the girl would at least eat something. Layla was immediately happy about this. She thanked the maid for her help and said that Marie always gives her everything that is right and necessary. However, at that moment, another person suddenly entered their bathroom. He turned to the lady and said that they had brought clothes for sleeping. As soon as Layla turned around and saw this nightgown, she was amazed. She asked Maria how she was supposed to put on this pajama if everything was see-through. She was overcome with anxiety and asked her assistant if it was possible to find something more closed and simple, because she would definitely feel uncomfortable in it. But Marie, sighing heavily, replied that this could not be done under any circumstances, because this was the Duke of Elman, the noblest and richest man in the empire. And for the first night with such a person, of course, the girl could not look normal, even if she really wanted to. Marie asked her if she even realized how many noble ladies had made efforts to win the Duke's attention, but he had never once shown any interest, nor even looked at them. So Marie said with complete confidence in her voice that if Layla wanted to win the Duke's heart from the very beginning, then she just had to put on these pajamas. The girl was very embarrassed. She liked it all for obvious reasons, but Marie told her to trust her, and the girl simply had no choice. She had to put it on anyway. After Layla finished taking a bath, she dried off her business and put on this nightgown, in which everything was really translucent. As soon as the maids saw her like this, they immediately applauded and said that she looked simply amazing. Meanwhile, Layla thought about what the Duke should also think. Otherwise, all her efforts would be in vain. Marie smiled and said that absolutely any man seeing her would fall in love immediately. So the Duke would definitely like her in this form, so she shouldn't worry at all. After this, they brought her to the bedroom, where the wedding night was to take place. Before leaving, Maria also said that she would tell the steward that the preparations were finished and that the Duke could come. Layla thanked her for her help, but before leaving, her assistant winked and said that in order to avoid getting it in her mouth, she should not have bitten that thing under any circumstances. As soon as Layla heard this, she immediately became confused. She did not understand at all what her assistant was saying, and because of this, she even became a little worried. And since that moment, quite a lot of time has passed, and no one has come to Layla. She even covered herself with a blanket because she felt cold. Then the girl thought about the fact that he had always been cold towards women, so most likely on such an important day, he simply sat in his office and did not come. The Duchess wanted to go there and check, but she understood that she could not go out in such an open state, so she opened the door slightly and was going to just listen to what was happening outside. And as soon as the girl tried to do this, the door to the room suddenly opened sharply, and Layla could barely stay on her feet because she had been unlocking the door all this time. At that moment, as she looked up, she saw in front of her a handsome, dark-haired man. And it was indeed the Duke. She immediately became embarrassed. She was so close to him, and in such a revealing form, so her whole face quickly began to burn with embarrassment. She herself saw that the top of his body was completely naked. She thought about what she should do. Maybe she should have hugged him first, or kissed him. Layla was confused. She had never been in such situations before, so she couldn't even imagine what to do. But then, suddenly, the Duke asked if he could go inside. Layla immediately blushed even more. She asked him for forgiveness for blocking the way, and, stepping aside, of course, allowed him to enter. The man walked inside and went straight to the bed. Layla immediately thought that he wanted to start from this place, so she decided to get ahead of him so that everything would be correct. She quickly ran to the bed and lay down there, continuing to cover the open areas on her body. After this, she turned her head to the side and saw that the Duke began to take off his robe, and also all the remaining clothes. He was also completely naked. After he did all this, he began to approach Layla closer. She thought about how it all began and closed her eyes in anticipation of the man's lips. And finally, Kai moved closer to her and kissed her right on the lips. It was a rather passionate kiss, but soon he suddenly moved away from her. The girl immediately became wary. She thought that she had done something wrong. But then, suddenly, the Duke said that she was probably very tired, so he suggested that she go to bed already, and also wished her good night. After that, he simply took his part of the bed and turned onto his side. Meanwhile, Layla was lying next to him, and did not understand at all what had happened. She thought that something more grandiose should happen, and not just him kissing her and going to bed. And so, even several days passed from that moment, and the maids who always changed the bed linen in the bedroom of the Duchess and the Duke suddenly began to discuss something. One of the maids asked the other if the bed linen was also completely clean this time. Her partner said that unfortunately this was the case, and also added that she was already tired of changing it and washing it, since there was absolutely no need for it. But at that moment, the door behind them opened, and Layla the maid came out, and they were immediately scared that she could hear all this and punish them severely because of this. But the other maid replied that there was no point in that, since she was only half their mistress, so she advised her friend not to worry about it. As soon as Layla heard this, I immediately became very offended, because the servants who worked in this palace did not really respect her, but she decided not to tell them anything, because she knew that everything would only get worse. So when she passed by the window, she decided to look out and saw her husband standing below with his partners. Kai seemed to sense that someone was looking at him, raised their head up, and their gazes met. But the man looked quite stern and very quickly turned back and answered something to his partners. Layla was actually very worried. She didn't understand why her husband behaved in such a way. He had never even hugged her during the entire time they were married. Every time Layla woke up in bed, she noticed that by that time, the man was no longer with her. A whole month had already passed since their wedding, and the news that they had not spent their wedding night immediately spread, of course, among the servants. And the governess, who was also the wife of the Desveri, immediately took up this issue because she believed that it should not be like this. And from that moment on, Layla began to be given very small portions for each meal. She had a bath until her hands swelled from the water. Every night the Duke came in his sleep clothes, but he simply kissed her goodnight on the lips, and then lay down next to her and fell asleep, and nothing happened. Of course, Layla was very irritated by all this. She did not understand what was wrong with her, and the girl also prepared a special flower so that it would please her at least a little. But even this beautiful plant was not able to cheer up Layla. She was already very sad, and something else happened to it that all the leaves were gnawed. But at that moment, as she stood on the balcony and breathed fresh air, Marie suddenly came to her. She finally found the lady she had been looking for a long time. The assistant came closer to her, and seeing that the leaves on the flower had withered, said that it was a pity because this was a plant that she had grown from her homeland. Marie also completely forgot what it was called, so she asked the girl again, and Layla said that it was called Letitia. With a smile on her face, Ella explained that these were medicinal herbs that were grown by the people of Flar, and that she had brought several specimens with her so that they would remind her of her homeland. In fact, in Fular, when someone appeared who was liked by a person, they would plant a lutetium seed and name it in honor of that person. The plant is constantly cared for, and having collected a bouquet of blossoming flowers, they confessed their feelings. Layla's brother also proposed to Maleficent, her best friend. She explained all these subtleties to her assistant Maria, but became sad because she brought him precisely for this reason, and he suddenly became so sick. But the maid smiled happily and said that it was most likely because the sunlight practically did not penetrate into the mistress's room, and that was why he simply could not stand it. Layla agreed with her and asked what was the point of just a beautiful rebellion, which was this estate. The sun hardly penetrated, and therefore the flowers did not bloom, and people were terribly cold towards each other. She did not like all this at all. Layla knew that from the very beginning, this whole brother was very strange to her. A year ago, at one of the events, she saw Kai and thought that he was quite popular, but she didn't know who he was when the girl first saw him. When she looked at his clothes, she realized that he was not from Flor, and for this reason he interested her quite a lot. So Layla did not take her eyes off him the whole evening. But one day, Kai also met her gaze. She smiled awkwardly and took him aside. The man also quickly turned the other way and began to listen to the lady who was talking to him. At that moment, Layla thought that he had scared her a little, and soon after that ball, a letter with a proposal and a whole ash chest filled with gold coins arrived at the girl's home. The girl and her brother immediately read this sentence and were surprised. She turned to the carrier who had just brought it and said that he must have gotten the address wrong. But the man asked if it was right that he came to the Fuller barony. Layla then answered that it was, and the man explained that he had not confused anything at all and that it was just for them. Afterwards, she, her brother, and her best friend gathered over a cup of tea and tried to understand how this could have happened and what they needed to do now. The man asked if she had met with the Duke of Elman, since he had not heard about it yet. His sister had not told him anything. Lost in thought, Layla said that they had seen each other at the dance, but had not even exchanged greetings. They had not spoken to each other at all, so she could not understand why he had suddenly decided to make this strange proposal. It was quite obvious that it was very difficult to refuse when she came with an offer and so many gold coins, especially considering the difficult financial situation of Layla and her family. She knew at that moment that if she refused to marry an aristocrat from the upper class and married an ordinary person, then very strange and unpleasant rumors would start about the Falar. Layla also understood that since the man had sent a whole chest of gold despite the fact that they were not acquainted at all, this meant that he had some kind of goal in all of this. So without thinking twice, she told her brother and best friend that by marrying him, she had made a final decision because she knew it would be better for everyone. Of course, the brother and Maleficent were shocked when they heard this, and their friend immediately said that she shouldn't have forced herself to do it. If she didn't want to, she could refuse it at any moment and had every right to. Well, Layla said that everything was fine. She thought that it was certainly nice to marry for love, as they did, but she thought that it would be possible to grow love already in the marriage itself, so she told them not to worry about it. She also added that the Duke was, of course, also handsome. She turned to Maleficent and said that she had already said that a handsome husband could be forgiven for his mistakes. Of course, this was a hint at her brother. The guy, hearing this, immediately became embarrassed. But Layla, after talking with them for a while, explained that they definitely didn't have to worry. And the next time, she planted the very seed of this delightful plant and named it Kai. The girl was in joyful anticipation. She thought that as soon as the flowers bloomed, she would definitely give them to the Duke, and she really hoped that he would like them. Well now, when a lot of time has passed since that moment, and Layla's flowers have almost completely withered, she was very sad that she never managed to do it. But soon, she realized that she needed to gather her strength, so she turned to Maria and asked her to apply more aromatic oil to her next time. Her maid was a little surprised by this, but Layla was not going to give up. She knew that if she continued to try to fight for this flower, it would definitely bloom. And as soon as she thought about it, she realized that this concerned not only the plant, but also her relationship with the Duke. Meanwhile, Layla had already left the balcony. Akai decided to look there again, but when he didn't see the girl, he even got a little upset. However, His assistant turned to him and said that the Duchess had just passed by, and he had not paid attention to her. Kai sighed heavily and said that he knew all this. Voli suddenly got angry and asked if he really saw her and didn't even talk to her. How dare he do that? He didn't understand why he yelled at him like that, so he decided to just not respond to it because he didn't see any point in it. But Volya asked if the guy was even aware of the conversations that were going on between the maids about their relationship. Everyone around them thought that he had finally gotten married because he was feeling better, but the guy wondered if the whole problem was really that same thing again. At that moment, Kai remembered how, as a child, he arrived at one of the events and immediately heard how everyone around began to spread rumors about him. People said that this was the same child who had known his father, Duke Drake, and had immediately risen to the title of Duke. No one around understood how Drake could have failed so badly if a child had treated his father like that. But one of the aristocrats had heard that he had squandered almost all of the ducal property. He was crazy about gambling and love, and it didn't matter whether it was with a man or a woman. But nevertheless, he ascended the throne and was not expelled because he was different from his father. However, people did not think so. They thought that, of course, it was unknown what Kai could become in the future. They believed that he could be the same as Drake, because genes could not be ignored in any case. And this haunted the boy for a long time. Everyone was constantly thinking that he would become like his father, that he would start to walk around and squander all the money, and that he would now have to be expelled from the ducal title. In fact, since childhood, Kai caught his father with various women and even men, and it was all so disgusting to him. It was precisely because of Drake's reputation as a lustful profligate and scoundrel, as well as a disgrace to the Elmar family, that Kai had a very hard time dealing with it, because this reputation had also passed on to him by inheritance. When his mother was dying, he came into the room where his father was having fun with one of the women and told him about it. The man, hearing this, only grabbed one of the girls by the hair and showed her to Kai, telling him to have fun with her, because that way it could definitely become easier. But the boy, hearing and seeing all this, was horrified. He became so disgusted by the sight of a naked woman and his father that he was ready to even vomit on the spot. He barely managed to hold on, so he simply ran away from the room where it stank of alcohol, and it was also very stuffy, and he caught his breath in the corridor, leaning against the wall. Then the maid found him. She said that the mistress had become completely ill, so of course Kai went to the room to his mother, who at that moment looked like a ghost. Kai's cell was next to his mother, who covered her ears and said that she didn't want to hear any of this, that it was all terrible for her. However, the boy suddenly burst into tears. He wanted to somehow help his mother, but it was all useless. She then looked at him with an angry look and said that it was all because of him. The woman also said in a hoarse voice that if Ko had not been born, everything would have been completely different. And immediately after she said these words, the woman lost consciousness and then died completely. The guy, meanwhile, could not believe that his mother actually said these words. He left the room and simply did not know what to do. He was very confused because his father and mother were absolutely terrible people. Therefore, for Kai, absolutely any physical contact was pure dirt. He did not want to get involved with anyone in this way anymore, and that is why he often avoided even the glances of women. For him, the events that happened in childhood became a trauma. The man, meanwhile, had already returned to his office. He lay down to rest a little and said that something was clearly wrong. But Will only asked with contempt whether he was still continuing to ignore reality. After that, the guy smiled happily and said that he still thought that the problem was not inability A-B desire, and he asked his master if he really was a eunuch after all. Kai ignored this remark and replied that the doctors said that everything was absolutely normal with his body. The problem was something else. His assistant replied that it made no difference. The bride would definitely run away if he did nothing or did not explain to her. As soon as Kai heard about this, he was immediately very surprised and asked what the guy meant. But Volya did not understand why he was so surprised, because it was all logical in high society. Divorce is not an easy matter. Therefore, ladies who are not interested in their husbands started at least a lover. It doesn't matter how formal this marriage was. At this rate, Kai had no choice, and soon the woman will really find someone else who can satisfy her needs and desires. But before he could finish speaking, his master suddenly stood up and simply left. Of course, he was very surprised, but he did not try to catch up with him because he understood that he needed to be alone. After that, the guy went to the bathroom. He decided to think about all this in hot water, but in fact, those words of his assistant surprised the man very much, because he had not thought about this at all before. Kai was intoxicated with the happiness of his marriage, and in fear that she would marry someone else, he was in a hurry to propose to her as soon as possible because he had sincerely fallen in love with this girl. However, he did not understand at all what was happening to him. He could not even hug her or talk to his wife. He simply did not have the strength to even look her in the eyes for more than 3 seconds. Kai realized that if things continued like this, it was only a matter of time before the girl would find a lover for herself, and he certainly didn't want that. So in the evening, as soon as he finished taking a bath, he went to the bedroom and knocked before entering, but when there was no answer, he decided to go inside and saw that there was no one there. To make sure of this, he asked if he was really alone. When the men finally heard Layla's voice, who appeared from the side, and asked if he had finally finished with his business, the guy immediately turned his head to the side and saw that she was wearing an incredibly revealing outfit, which made him feel very uneasy. He was about to step aside and ask Layla what she was doing, but the girl came up to him and led him to the bed. She sat him down on the bed and, turning to the Duke, asked him to hug her. She was completely naked, and the man, who was afraid to even look at her, was amazed. He did not know what to do or how to react at all. But then, he decided to take the situation into his own hands. Kaiba moved closer to her and began to passionately kiss her on the lips. It was so fast and passionate that the girl couldn't even breathe at some point, so she had to move away from him and take a few deep breaths just to not die. The man looked at the girl, who was clearly expecting something from this evening, and decided to really take the initiative. He turned Layla back on the bed and stood over her, then began to move down and kiss her neck tenderly. The girl was very happy about this. She was happy that he finally started doing this. After the kisses ended, he began to move lower and gently touch different parts of her body. Even simple touches made Layla feel incredibly pleasant, and she thought that this was exactly what Maleficent was talking about. It was a strange but delightful feeling. She thought that things could be even better next, so she turned to the Duke and said that he could move on to the next phase. Suddenly, his gaze stopped, became very distant, and he simply asked her for forgiveness. The man stopped doing anything. Layla tried to stop him, but the man simply left. He no longer agreed to this, and so she had to go to bed without waiting for what she wanted. The next morning, Marie was in high spirits, because it was she who helped organize the girls' romantic evening, and she really hoped that everything went well for them. The woman had a good feeling. She decided that they would have a smooth first night. I thought that they were still asleep, so I knocked and went inside and turned to the lady with a smile on my face. But Layla, as soon as she saw Marie, immediately burst into tears. She asked her assistant what she should do now. She threw herself into her arms and said that last night she had taken a much longer bath and had put on underwear that she had never worn in her life and would never have thought of wearing. That evening, Layla even took the initiative and made the first move on the Duke, who refused her and even asked for forgiveness. She asked Maria what this meant, what she should have done, and asked her to give her some advice on what else she could do to entice him. Layla continued to cry and told her assistant that she was incredibly ashamed. She even wished that she could somehow lose her feelings because she would not be able to even look him in the eye after yesterday. Some time passed since then, and Layla finally calmed down. Look, I brought her some tea and asked if everything was okay with her now. The girl said that this was so. Then the maid suggested that she go for a little walk, so that she could lift her spirits and take her mind off things. But the Duchess, taking a mug of tea, said that she would like to go reading that day. But Maria replied that if she needed any books, she would be happy to bring them. However, Layla refused her. She said that she needed to get her thoughts in order, so she herself would like to go there and be alone for a while. What she didn't want most at that moment was to meet the Duke, and of course that put her off. But she thought that she really needed to go get some books and put her thoughts in order a little. Meanwhile, Kai was sitting in his office. He was having a business meeting with his assistant. Voli turned to their partner Olesya. and asked if it was really always so gloomy in the office. The man explained that it was all a matter of the atmosphere, that's all. At that moment, Kaif suddenly became very angry. He put the piece of paper on the table so hard that his assistant even got a little scared, because it was a really loud sound. The guy thought that he had definitely gone completely crazy. He also did not understand how everything could have become so confused. He caught his breath, and so he ran out of the room. But the man did not understand why, because he was really serious about doing what she wanted. Kai blamed himself a lot for the fact that he just up and left the girl, and also ran out of the room without even explaining anything to her properly. Those toys of his father that lived in the estate disappeared as soon as he was expelled, and after receiving the title, the man was insanely busy. However, all these painful feelings and memories gradually dulled, but now, when he saw the naked girl last night, they immediately came back to him. The man found it hard to breathe. He began to choke. He himself incredibly wanted to hug Layla, to show how important she was to him, to convey to her the feelings that he was experiencing. However, for reasons unknown to himself, he could not do this. He simply watched and sat helplessly on the sofa. Kai could not do anything about it. At that moment, he was simply overcome with incredible panic. He asked the girl for forgiveness and left, and as soon as he went out the door, he immediately began to breathe heavily, trying to calm down. Of course, he didn't like all this because he expected a completely different result, but he also didn't understand what was wrong with him. He realized that he definitely couldn't do that. He needed to go back, but at that moment, he seemed to be choked by his father's words, which spoke of the need to take possession of this woman. He had every right to do so. Of course, as soon as Kai heard these words in his head, he did not understand what happened, but his father continued to put pressure on him. Although he was not even there, he said that this was why the man was weak. He didn't understand how such a man could even be his son. His fiancée was already so excited, and now she would only hate him because he couldn't follow through. His father continued to talk about how Layla would now want to go home. She didn't understand why this had happened to her, and also why Kai had gotten married at all if he had behaved so distantly. The voice of his father in Kai's head also said that everyone he loved couldn't stand him because he simply couldn't show and express his feelings. And besides, that night the man dreamed of a similar kind of terrible nightmare, how his father scolded and accused. The man knew that it was just a dream, but did not understand why it had such a great effect on him. After a short silence, Kai turned to their dismissed butler and asked if it was true that the man had put everything in the estate even before his birth. The man immediately said that this was indeed the case, and also asked why he suddenly decided to ask about it so suddenly. But Kai looked very serious. He asked the butler whether he had told him about all the things his father had done, or whether he had hidden something, since he was still a child at that time. The man was silent for a while. It was obvious that he was a little worried, but Wallace said that of course he told everything. He explained that he and Mr. Uvoli had taken care of all the traces and covered them up. It had taken a long time, but he had certainly informed Kai of all the atrocities. The guy, hearing this, was a little upset because he hoped that he could find out even more information about his father and perhaps even understand his motives. When his assistant saw that the man had become a little sad, he asked with a smile on his face what had happened and why he was so downcast. Well, Kai picked up the papers and began to study them. He said that nothing like that had happened, so he suggested that they just get back to business. In fact, last night, he had seen very strange and unpleasant hallucinations, but the guy also understood that he could not tell anyone about them. He knew that this could lead to rumors that he had gone crazy just like his father, and he certainly didn't need that. And all because, up until now, there were also many people who wanted the fall of the Elman family, and Kai could not allow anything like that to happen under any circumstances. And even when the morning came, and the man plunged into work, he still could not calm down after everything that had happened. These thoughts did not cross his mind throughout the whole day. At that moment, someone suddenly knocked on their door, and she was allowed to enter. And then the maid approached the butler and said that a letter had arrived from the Marquis. She said that she was asked to convey something urgently. As soon as the butler heard this, he was immediately surprised. So he picked up the envelopes and studied what was written there. When he opened the letter, He saw that it was addressed to the Duke, and that it said that the wedding of Marquis Alan de Marquis and the Count's daughter Aretta was about to take place very soon. As soon as he saw what kind of lady it was, he immediately became wary and turned to the maid and asked who exactly asked to convey all this. Then the maid replied that she didn't know this either. It was passed on to her through another person, so she couldn't answer this question. She quit and then allowed her to go, but he himself began to think about who could be behind all this. At some point, the maid came to the senior servant and addressed her. She had something to convey to her. She came closer to the maid and quietly conveyed all this. As soon as the woman heard this, she immediately gave her a small bag and said that this is exactly what she suspected. In fact, she saw how a few years ago a lady with scarlet hair came out of the office, and even half naked. The maid explained that there weren't many families with hair that color, so she knew right away that it was Lady Arete. The woman also heard that she and the Duke were often seen together at social events. Her partner said that since there was no talk of marriage, she was simply one of many mistresses. The woman said that it was quite obvious that the Duke preferred women with such tempting forms as hers, which was why he did not choose any of those skinny girls. The maid laughed and said that the current wife did not have any charm that could attract a man. So the question remained how she held on to him at all. And her friend replied that this was exactly the case when they brought in an ignorant woman. Her poor noble family would have received wealth, and the Duke would have been able to freely have mistresses and not worry that his wife would not approve of it. The woman also said that in bed, the Duchess was clearly no better than a log, and that was precisely why the Duke could hardly wait to bring himself a new lady. But just at that moment, Layla, together with her assistant, came out from around the corner where the women were heading, and she heard those words perfectly well. Of course, they felt very ashamed. They bowed and greeted the Duchess, but did not comment in any way on what they said. Meanwhile, Layla greeted her in response. And then suddenly, the woman said that she was just heading towards her to talk about something. The girl, hearing this, was a little surprised and immediately asked what exactly. The governess then said that making friends and associating with noble ladies from outside the social circles was an important factor in the life of the Duchess, and she asked Layli if she knew that this was a very necessary duty for her, because now she had such an important title. The woman also said with a heavy sigh that many different rumors and conversations about her had already begun to circulate in high society because a whole month had already passed since the wedding, and the Duchess still had not organized the necessary reception. As soon as Layla heard about this, she even panicked a little. She had never heard of anything like this, and therefore did nothing. But now she realized that it was mandatory. The governess, meanwhile, frowned and told the girl that if she behaved like that, then Duke Elmond's reputation would certainly suffer, and she certainly did not want to allow that to happen. Layla, hearing this, immediately said that she understood everything and heard her, and added that he would decide on the date that same day and convey everything to her. The governess, hearing this, was pleased and told the girl to do so because it was impossible to delay any longer. She also added that Layla still had a lot to learn, so she should prematurely avoid doing anything that could cause criticism from everyone around her. It would even be more beneficial for her. The woman even began to criticize the Duchess and said that she should have done at least one of her duties properly, and Layla was struck by these words and stood there for some time after they left and did not move. And her personal assistant Maria was very angry because she didn't like the way they were talking at all. She turned to the lady and asked how it was possible to become more and more arrogant every day. Meanwhile, she went on and said nothing. Her assistant continued to speak and said that she had heard that Madame Desfer was only a distant relative of the Duke, but from her behavior, anyone could decide that she was his aunt. And besides, she didn't understand why the head maid even allowed herself to behave like that, and most importantly, the statements they heard when they approached this sweet couple. Meanwhile, Layla continued to remain silent. Marie then became a little worried and asked the lady if she was really going to leave it all like that, since for her, it was unthinkable. "Well?" Layla answered in a calm voice that she didn't see anything wrong with it. They weren't wrong about anything. She also told Marie that the girl herself knew perfectly well that these two had disliked her from the very beginning, so it was quite obvious that they would not listen to her and communicate politely. The girl smiled a little and said that serving the Duke's wife, who came from the province, hurt their pride, and therefore it was quite obvious that they were not going to just put up with the new rules. Maria, hearing this, was very upset. She could not even contain her emotions and cried bitterly. As soon as the Duchess saw this, she was very shocked. She did not expect to see such a reaction from her assistant. She immediately turned to Maria and asked what had happened that made her so upset. Well, her assistant said through tears that she hated the Duke with all her soul, and that her mistress had such a hard time, and he wasn't even going to help her in anything. Layla suddenly laughed and said that she, like a child, took it all to heart and advised her not to worry like that anymore, because everything was fine with her. But her maid asked her mistress not to laugh so hard, because she was really worried about her well-being and wanted her mistress to have the best. Layla thanked her for this, but told her to stop crying already. They needed to go to the reading room. She also explained to Marie that even if the first night had been a success, their behavior would certainly have changed, but their true intentions would have remained the same. The girl was well aware of the fact that these ladies were simply waiting for her to give in and lose her temper, but the girl was not going to allow them such luxury. Layla knew perfectly well that if she returned to the Fowler, it would be an even greater shame than if she had refused the Duke's offer. She was also aware of the fact that if she returned, her family, whom she loved so much, would be in big trouble. When she heard the maids talking about Lady Areto being the Duke's mistress, she certainly felt uncomfortable. But now, after some time, she understood that she should in no way listen to those people who only wanted to harm her. Of course, she also understood the fact that the Duke could fall asleep so quickly because he had a mistress, and because of this he no longer wanted anything like that. And yet, Layla still had to answer for her choice, so she decided that from now on, she would not live like a little child. She needed to at least learn something about the Duke in order to take any measures in the future. Since the man didn't tell her anything about himself and always looked at her with indifference, Layla decided to find out why he made her this proposal. Therefore, as soon as she came to the reading room, she sat there for several hours. The first thing she did was take a book about the history of Elman and, of course, asked for a cup of tea so as not to fall asleep. But it was incredibly difficult for her to do this, so she even fell asleep a little while reading one of the pages of this book. Maury, meanwhile, took care of the lady and even brought her a blanket so that the girl would not be so uncomfortable. Marie sat next to Layla and realized that the lady was probably not getting enough sleep, and because of this, she felt sad, because she wanted to help this beautiful young girl with all her might. In fact, some time ago, her employer gave Maria an invitation and told her to move to the Elman family. The girl was very surprised at the time, but her employer said that they were just looking for a capable maid, and she recommended her. She explained to Marie that this was a ducal family, so she should receive a good salary there. This offer was really ideal for her, so she thanked her mentor and said that she was incredibly grateful to her. Of course, Marie could not refuse and began to serve the family of Elman, about whom there were bad rumors, and this initially repelled her. And even she felt hostility towards the provincial girl whom she had not even met yet. Maria wondered how she could have gotten this arrogant Duke. What exactly could have attracted him? She assumed that this woman was probably very seductive and had many lovers, which of course would have a very bad effect on the reputation of the Duke himself. Marie also thought that since she lived in Village A in this place, she would become part of the ducal family, so she would definitely spend money on all sorts of unnecessary things, and this also worried her. This is when Layla first came to the palace, and Maria saw her. She was sincerely amazed, because the girl looked much simpler than the woman had imagined. That day, the Duke came out to greet her, of course. When Layla had to get out of the carriage, he extended his hand to help her, because she was quite tall. His wife gladly accepted this hand. However, when she was going down, she accidentally caught on a step and began to fall. Marie, when she saw this, immediately panicked. She already wanted to run and grab the Duchess, but did not have time to do it. Fortunately, everything turned out well because the Duke managed to react in time. He took Layla in his arms and held her. This sight was very beautiful and tender. Soon after Layla entered the palace, Marie met with her and told her that she would now be her personal maid, and also added how important it was for her to serve her. The new Duchess, when she saw her, immediately smiled and introduced herself. But Marie replied that she would not have to treat her so formally in the future, since no one usually did that with servants. Then Layla lowered her head down and asked her for forgiveness. She said that it was still very difficult for her to treat people she met for the first time in a different way, but she would definitely learn this lesson. Marie was amazed, because the girl did not even suspect that she seemed to be quite a simple lady when she treated the servants so formally, and this was treasured by her. In the end, their wedding did not take place right away, since there were no necessary governesses in the Faller barn, so the lady had to study for several months in order to become a real duchess and learn all the rules. Disveri's husband put so much pressure on the lady that it no longer looked like training. Marie realized that she did not want the girl from the barony to end up as a duchess, and that was precisely the reason why she mocked poor Layla so much. Of course, Marie was present at all these lessons, and when she observed the attitude of her wife Despair towards the future duchess, she realized that it was too cruel, and definitely should not have been done that way. On the day when the lady was severely scolded, Maria decided to console her a little and prepared tea for the lady along with sweets so that she would not be so sad. Then the girl thought about the fact that if she had been in Layla's place, she would have given up everything a long time ago. She even assumed that the lady was lying in bed that evening and crying because it was really cruel and unpleasant. But when Maria entered Tony's room, she saw her and started walking around the whole room looking for Layla. I don't understand where she could have gone. Without passing by the open window, she suddenly saw that the lady was below. She immediately turned to Layla and said that if she sat on the ground like that, her dress would get dirty and ruined. As soon as Layla heard this, she immediately asked Marie for forgiveness. She explained that her rook had grown a lot, and she was going to transplant him. The new duchess did not look upset at all. She even told her governess, with a smile on her face, that she was scolded in class because she only thought about this. So the first thing she did after class was to do this task. Maria, seeing that everything was okay with her, smiled happily and said that it was even not bad, after which she sat down next to her and decided to help. Layla always ended up exceeding the maid's expectations. She did not make bouquets of flowers like other noble ladies. She dug the earth and grew the plants herself because she felt more comfortable that way. She did not spend all the Duke's money on luxurious clothes and jewelry. On the contrary, she was even afraid that she might be treated with disdain because of the modesty that the girl possessed. Instead of meeting other aristocrats, Layla spent her days reading books that high society ladies would never touch. Marie even felt uncomfortable that at first she had such a bad, as it turned out later, erroneous opinion about Layla. She really felt guilty that she began to judge the girl without even meeting her. But fortunately, she quickly realized that Layla was a very modest and bright person who was pleasant to talk to. When they finished gardening, the woman decided to get to know the Duchess a little better and asked how they met the Duke in the first place. The girl then smiled and said that, of course it might sound strange, but they met at a social event and never even spoke then. Marie was truly shocked when she heard this. She didn't expect that something like this could happen to anyone. Well, Layla answered smiling, that until now, she didn't even know why the Duke proposed to her, because even after that reception, they never had any contact. Of course, Marie was very surprised when she found out that there had not even been a conversation between them, which meant that this marriage had some other reason besides love. However, the way the Duke looked when he first met Layla certainly couldn't be a lie. He definitely had some feelings for the girl, but for some reason he didn't want to show them. As soon as Maria thought about all this, she noticed that the Duchess was already asleep and had not finished reading her book. Of course, she was not allowed to do something like that, because she had a rather important status. However, Marie decided to close her eyes to it this time and not take it all into account, because she understood that the woman was probably very tired. After that, she wondered why the headmaid was so confident in herself. She even hoped that the butler would catch her when she said terrible things about the Duchess. Meanwhile, Kai was finally given this invitation about the Marquis's wedding, and the man sat and reread this invitation in the evening. He looked very serious and even a little upset. At that moment, the butler approached him and, bowing, said that he would send a worthy gift to the Marquis to compensate for their absence. But Kai said that it was necessary to send not just a decent, but even a luxurious gift. As soon as the butler heard this, he was very surprised and asked why this was being done. But the men explained that they needed to be thanked, because thanks to them, he finally married Layla, so they had to do it. In fact, several years ago, Count Lamon came to Kay and asked him for money. He needed 300 gold pieces because his sons were addicted to gambling, and his youngest daughter was obsessed with luxury. He told the man that he had accumulated debts due to unsuccessful investments and understood perfectly well the situation he had ended up in. But Khan did not understand what he was thinking about and why he had come to him. The count actually asked to be lent this sum of gold because he desperately needed it. Of course, Kai considered this amount to be very large, and so he tried to convey this idea to the count because he believed that the man could easily give him this money. He also said that he heard that his mansion, villa, and even estate in the capital were taken away from him due to debts. So he asked whether the county of Lamono had anything left at that time, or whether everything else had been taken away as well. The count had nothing to say to this, because even his son had suffered a misfortune. So Kai, seeing his reaction, simply told the man to leave. They had nothing to negotiate about. As soon as the man heard this, he immediately became upset. He understood that he needed to take this money, so he asked him to listen to him. He knelt before the Duke and said that he had one thing, a precious stone, and he was ready to give it away. He even burst into tears and said that he treasured it incredibly and hid it so that no one could get it. That way, at least he had something left. He told the Duke that he would show it to him, and then the man would make a final decision, and he really hoped that it could still help him. Kai was in anticipation at that moment. He said that he would be interested in actually looking at the stone, which would cost as much as 300 gold. Therefore, smiling, he asked the count to bring this stone so that he could look at it himself and then tell him whether he was ready for this deal or not to his wife. The man replied that he might not even go anywhere. He took him with him. But before that, he would also like to ask the Duke for something. He wanted the man to write the loan letter first, but he immediately became wary. He understood that he had something in mind, but he could not figure out what exactly. But for some time, he was silent. But soon he decided to play along with this count, and so he could find out his true intentions. So he turned to the will of the Sioux and asked him to bring the paper and seal from the office. The count, as soon as he heard about this, became worried. He suggested that Kai immediately go there together to the office and sign everything, and he would also like to show this stone only to him and to no one else. Therefore, Kai nevertheless agreed to this. He believed that this way he could accurately reveal the true intentions of this man. He got up from his seat and went with the count to the office, while giving a sign to Uvalis not to go with them. As they walked up the stairs, the man looked nervously from side to side, and soon suddenly stopped. He suddenly had a very sharp pain in his stomach. He grabbed it and told the Duke that he had eaten something wrong for lunch, and that was why he felt very bad. He asked him for forgiveness and told him to go first, and he would be back very soon. He needed to go to the toilet. Of course, as soon as Kai heard this, he realized that there was something unclean there, but he didn't show it and simply went into the office. But the count, meanwhile, only smiled happily and went in the other direction. In fact, a small, unpleasant surprise awaited him in Kai's office. As soon as the Duke entered the office, he saw a girl in front of him who was dressed in a rather revealing dress and had red hair. "You see her." The man immediately understood everything. Now the count's plan became quite obvious to him. This girl bowed and asked the Duke to forgive her for her bad manners, but said that she was forced to do so. But Kai was adamant. He immediately told Lady to go back to her place. He was not going to do anything and did not even want to listen to her. He walked up to his desk and said that if she left his office that very moment, he could forgive her for daring to enter it without permission. Meanwhile, the girl began to take off her cape and show her cleavage. She addressed the Duke in a gentle voice and asked him not to be so cold-blooded. She just needed a little time, and then everything would work out for them. But the man looked at her with an incredibly stern look because she took his hand. He pulled it away and said that if she wanted to talk about something, then they should have met in the reception area, but definitely not in his office. And of course, at this meeting, she must be present with Count Lamon. Otherwise, he was not going to act. The girl blocked his way because he was already about to leave the room and asked him to wait for a while. There was confusion and even fear on her face, but the man had only one disgust for this person, so he asked her to move away. Otherwise, he would have to use brute force, and he certainly did not want that. The girl then ran closer to him and in a gentle voice asked him to hug her at least once, since they were always together so often, dancing at ballroom receptions. She sincerely thought that he liked it too, even though he pretended that it wasn't so. She really wanted him to understand her feelings and knew that things wouldn't have happened differently if he had found out about everything earlier. She also asked with desperation in her voice if Kai even understood how hard she tried to win his heart and attract his attention. After that, she suddenly hung her voice and said that it was all his fault. And at that moment, he remembered the thrill of when he was at the funeral. Then the thought was constantly in his head that his mother had said terrible words. His mother constantly claimed that if the boy had not been born, she would have been able to save their marriage. And, of course, she considered Kai to be guilty of all his father's actions. And before his death, his father told him to take responsibility for the pain that brought his mother to the grave. His parents were definitely not the best, and after their death, the fate of the entire country was now on the boy's fragile shoulders, so he always tried to do the right thing and not break the accepted rules. Therefore, when the girl said that he was also to blame for what happened between them, Kai only asked in a cold voice why he had to take the blame on himself, because he did not understand this. As soon as the girl heard this, she immediately asked what he meant. His voice even began to scare her at some points. But Kai moved closer to her and, drawing out each word, asked what other responsibility he should bear in her opinion. The girl looked at him with a very confused look. She realized that she had done something stupid, but she didn't know how to get out of this situation now. Then he asked for which of the above he should take responsibility, for the incompetence of her father or the bad habits of her brothers. He even asked if she thought that he was responsible for her stupidity, because of which she did all the unpleasant things. At that moment, she even burst into tears. She got down on her knees and began to beg the Duke to make her his mistress. She didn't even ask to make her his wife. A lesser status was enough for her. She also said that if he could not accept her, then she would have to marry the Marquis de Marquise, and she certainly did not want that. Kai, hearing about this, suddenly thought about it and said that in that case there was even less need for this, because this man was quite a rich man, a descendant of their nobility. He could even be counted among the 5 fingers in the Ironman. He looked at the girl and said that she would not only be able to pay off all her family's debts, but also live the rest of her life in the luxury she dreamed of. But the girl was not at all happy with this. She continued to cry and said that he was very old, much older than her, and she certainly would not want that. She also added that if he really takes her as his wife, then this will be his 5th marriage. His children from his ex-husbands were even older than the girl herself. And besides, she, turning to Kai, said that she herself knew very well all these terrible and vile rumors about this man. There were rumors that he beat the servants and members of his own family. Such a man asked her for marriage in exchange for simply paying off his debts. Of course, this did not suit her. She asked the man if he really didn't feel sorry for her at all. But Kai asked if she thought that it would have been even for the best. He smiled and said that it was necessary to get rid of his daughter, who was obsessed with luxury, as soon as possible. He explained that it made no difference to her father whether to give Elmond to the Duke or to the Marquise de Marquis, because it was much more important for him to pay off his debts and save his own skin than to think about his daughter's life in the future. Of course, he had no intention of taking part in all this, and he thought that this should have been obvious to the girls from the very beginning. As soon as she heard this, she could not believe that her whole life was now definitely destroyed. He gave his answer, and it was not what she expected. But Kai sighed heavily and said that the dog would have already understood such a refusal, so he asked her to disappear from his sight and not take up much time. He looked at her with disgust and said that she had already dared to enter his office without permission, and for that alone, he wanted to grab her by the hair and throw her out of the estate. The girl did not respond to this. She was sincerely shocked by such an attitude towards herself. With a heavy sigh, she said at the end of a long silence that now it no longer mattered to her whether he would hug her or not. From that moment on, anyone who sees her must spread rumors that she is now his lover. At that moment, the girl took off her dress and showed him her bare breasts. She started to wipe off her lipstick with goop and make it sloppy so that it would really look like they were kissing. The girl said that in that case, he would have no choice but to take full responsibility for it, which is why she continued to do these strange things. At that moment, the man slowly approached her. She really hoped that he would now take and kiss her, and also make love. She was ready to promise him that all this would be very good, and he would definitely like it. But at that moment, Kai reached out his finger to her and said that the glory of the mistress was definitely not what she imagined it to be. The girl was in anticipation. She understood perfectly well that the Hertz would answer. In the end, he was a man and had his own needs, as well as instincts. She could hardly convince her father of this whole plan, and therefore could not miss such a precious chance, which fell to her only once, so she even went to such radical measures. The girls had to hold out long enough for everyone to think that there really was something between them, even if nothing would happen in reality. At that very moment, Kaif suddenly grabbed her hand and, opening the office, threw her out of there, asking if the trash in his office hadn't been thrown out since yesterday. The woman, who was still lying on the floor due to the fall with her chest exposed, turned to him and started screaming. She said that he couldn't even hug the woman, let alone kiss her. The lady asked if he was a eunuch or just a real weakling that he didn't do it. The man completely ignored her words. He simply turned around and started to leave, and she burst into tears and asked him not to leave like that and not to abandon her. After this, the girl began to talk about the fact that Duke Elmina was a eunuch who, as a man, was definitely not capable of anything. She was going to tell the entire high society about this, and then things would definitely become difficult for him. Of course, Kai immediately smiled upon hearing this. He said that although it was tiring, the idea was indeed excellent. The girl started to continue screaming and said that she was not lying at all. She was really ready to spread these rumors and make everyone call him a eunuch. But at that moment, the man had already entered his office and did not answer her. He sighed heavily. In fact, this whole situation had driven him crazy. By that time, his butler, Yi Kai, had already approached him and asked him to find Count Laman and convey that his precious stone would not be worth even 1 coin, and that's why he could get rid of him immediately. And he also asked that the dismissed person not forget to warn that if he does something like that again, he will have serious problems and consequences. The butler, having heard all this, immediately said that he understood everything, after which he passed on the necessary information to her count, and he finally took his daughter. At that time, the senior maid, who was nearby and saw all this, immediately, of course, misunderstood everything and was very shocked by what she saw. After this, everything in the Duke's office was cleaned up, and the room was thoroughly aired so that there was no smell left from this woman. When his assistant came and saw how thorough the cleaning was, he said that he was just wondering why they started working so late. But now he saw an explanation. Volya mockingly asked if the man had really decided to clean out his entire office just because a woman had entered it. At that moment, Kai had not yet recovered from what was happening, and in a rough voice told his assistant to choose his words carefully. Otherwise, he would face serious consequences. He explained that it took him 8 years to restore his family's honor and assets, but they would never forget the shame of Elman that came from his father, and he understood that if he showed any weakness or distrust of his people, then everything would be destroyed. Upon hearing this, he immediately replied that he understood everything and understood his concern perfectly well. It was completely justified. But he still wondered if the guy was really going to ignore all those rumors about him being a eunuch if the girl did it anyway. At that moment, Kai came to the window and said that she had in fact not made a mistake in anything. As soon as he heard this, he was very shocked and asked what he was even saying. How could a eunuch have such a size at the bottom of his waist? He even started showing it on his hands. Kai saw it and immediately became wary and asked why he was making such gestures, because it was not appropriate for an aristocrat. But after a short silence, he said that the problem was not that at all. No woman was definitely capable of arousing desire in him, especially that woman who pounced on him like a madwoman. It wasn't that he didn't want it, but that all this vulgarity made him feel downright sick. Will, hearing this, was a little shocked. He thought that this was already too much, but the Duke replied that he didn't care at all whether rumors would spread or not. He was going to leave everything as it was. He was already tired of the woman hovering around him, so he thought that this could even be a pleasant bonus. He really thought that if rumors spread that he was a eunuch, they would bother him less and he would finally be able to relax. That's when one day he came to that event where he just met Layla. At the beginning of the evening, as always, many ladies approached him and tried to talk to him. One of the girls asked if he really had also come to the reception at the imperial castle, since they had not expected to see him that evening. But the man replied in an indifferent tone that it was quite obvious that he had appeared there, since he too received protection as a citizen of the empire and was obliged to come. Then the girl decided to ask him if he would like to dance with her, but the man immediately understood what she was getting at and started coughing. He turned to all the girls and asked them for forgiveness, saying that his throat was a little dry, so he needed to step away and drink something. Of course, the aristocrat was very upset about this, but she did not block his way and calmly let him go. The man himself at that moment realized that the rumors about him did not have the effect he had expected, and of course, this left him quite disappointed. After some time, as soon as he took the wine, he suddenly noticed that Will was standing and talking quite nicely with some girl. This Kaya was very surprised, because his assistant forced him to come to this event, although he was against it, and he thus concluded that the guy needed it much more than the Duke. Before this event, Will every day reminded him that the guy needed to get rid of the rumors that he was a eunuch and appear at least in high society. He needed to go to appointments and show that he was completely healthy, at least in this way to let everyone know that he had a little interest in women. Volé was so annoying that Kai eventually just had to go to the event to get him to leave him alone. Therefore, over time, he began to attend only the most important receptions, which were impossible to refuse. And as always, he noticed at these events only fuss and unnecessary noise. When he looked at the guests, he did not understand at all why they all wore such a large number of shiny decorations. For him, this was really too much. He believed that one should know when to stop. Then he finally saw Layla, a beautiful girl who was unremarkable in no way. She had long golden hair and a modest dress. Having seen her, he immediately concluded that she was even simple and ordinary. But this girl interested him, and he wanted to know who she was. Compared to the others, she was really too simple, but at least it stopped his eyes from hurting, because usually ladies put on all the shiny jewelry and also put on a lot of perfume. For some time he stood and really watched Layla, how she behaved and what she focused on more. For example, she didn't like alcohol at all, but desserts attracted her attention. Kai also noticed that her facial expression changed almost every minute, and this also surprised him greatly. He did not understand how one could be such an open book. He doesn't even remember ever greeting her, and all this time the man was staring at her. Soon Layla seemed to sense this, and their gazes crossed. The man looked away from her and thought that he had no need to think and guess who this girl was. He always knew that since they had met eyes, she herself should have approached, but Layla so smiled and then turned around and walked to the other side of the hall. Of course, this fact struck him incredibly. He could not understand how she could prefer to go to the cookies rather than to him. This had never happened to him before, so it was something new, but he didn't have time to do anything because Count Balor approached him. Next to him stood a young girl. Kai told the Count that he had organized an excellent reception. Everything was, as always, at the highest level. The guy immediately thanked him after that, pointing to the young girl, said that this was his youngest daughter. After that, he asked his daughter to greet the Duke. The young and very nice lady immediately bowed and said that her name was Rosalind, and it was a great honor for her that the man came to this event despite his heavy workload. He also bowed and greeted her and said that it was nice to meet her, after which the conversation did not interest him at all, and he decided to look at the girl who interested him more. But as soon as he looked up at the cookie stand, he noticed that she had already eaten her fill and had gone off somewhere in the other direction. Then he turned his gaze to the left and saw that Layla had passed right next to her, and some man was walking behind her. At that moment, Kai understood why she hadn't approached him then. After all, she already had a partner. That explained everything. At that moment, several women approached him again, but they were already elderly, and turned to the Duke and said that they had not seen him at events for a long time after that. They began to praise his appearance and how much he had matured. And so the rest of the evening went on. As soon as it got dark outside and the hall became too stuffy, the man decided to go out into the yard and get some fresh air because it was already unbearable for him to be there. Kai stood in the fresh air and wondered if the countesses who talked to him were always so loud that they even gave him a bad headache. And then suddenly he raised his gaze and looked somewhere to the side. There he saw the same golden hair that had captivated him. The man immediately guessed that this was the same simple lady, so he decided to show courage and come a little closer to see what she was doing in the bushes. When Kai got a little closer, he took a closer look. He tried to understand what she was doing, because it was strange to him that she had not yet stood up and greeted him first. Usually everyone does that. And then he came a little closer to her and saw that Layla was holding a small book in her hands and was very engrossed in reading. She took off her shoes, which were pinching her feet, and her gloves, and sitting on the swing, surrounded by the wonderful scent of flowers and the delicate color from the lantern, Layla looked even more beautiful. Kai was amazed because the other ladies were all busy greeting and inviting people to dance, while the girl hid from everyone and just sat and calmly read a book. She really interested him incredibly. He needed to know who she was, because this girl was definitely not like everyone else. Of course, he never expected such behavior from aristocrats. And besides, this mysterious girl missed the chance to meet Kai because she was simply reading a book. The man knew that he could not be the first to speak to such a simple woman, because his family were aristocrats from the upper class of the empire, and this would simply violate all the rules of etiquette. For this reason, he simply turned around and started to leave, thinking about the fact that he himself had decided to avoid people and not communicate with anyone. And now, for some reason, he was thinking about how to talk to this lady. Here, suddenly, Kai stopped. He really wanted to go back there and meet her, and also talk about different things. But at the same time, he knew that he couldn't do that. Because of this, he had a serious struggle. He didn't understand what kind of stubbornness had appeared in his head. But then he thought that he had already decided to return to the hall anyway, and decided to give her another chance on the way back so that she would pay attention to him and talk to him. But then suddenly, he saw a fair-haired guy approach her. He turned to her and called her Layla. Kai quickly walked up to the wall and hid in the shadows so that no one would notice him, and he began to listen carefully to the words they were saying. The young guy, who was her brother, became nervous and said that he had already searched the entire hall in search of her and asked why she was sitting outside, away from everyone. At that moment, Kai immediately remembered who that man was. He greeted the Duke and said that he was Baron Folar. Of course, seeing such a young guy, he said that the guy was not the Baron Folar he knew. And Lois, with a smile on his face, explained that he knew his father, who had recently passed away, and he had come to the capital to notify everyone that he had inherited his title. Of course, Kai couldn't help but notice their similarity in appearance, so he assumed that she was his sister, which for some unknown reason made him feel a little better. The guy leaned over and started helping Layla put her shoes back on her feet, and also asked why she was reading a book again during the ball in the hall, when there were so many young men with whom she could chat and dance. At that moment, Kai thought about the fact that the Powdered Baron was an outstanding scientist and assumed that their love for books was a family thing, since even the girl couldn't tear herself away from them at important events. Layla then turned to her brother in a thin, beautiful, sweet voice and said that she was not in this place of her own free will, and that is why she did not want to communicate with anyone. The man, hearing her voice, thought for a while about how beautiful he really was. He was not as rude as he imagined, but he perfectly matched her appearance and nature. The brother then sat down next to Layla, and she said that he was busy exchanging greetings, so she went to the library alone. But suddenly, men and women entered there, breathing very heavily. After that, they started to press themselves quite closely to each other. She got so scared that she decided to just leave there and hid in the garden. Kai, hearing this touching story, wondered who would use the library for its intended purpose, especially at such a late night. He thought that this girl was definitely unusual, and because of this, she interested him even more. Meanwhile, Loris asked his sister why she had even gone to the library on such a day. Hadn't she gone out with the second son of Viscount Launis? Hearing this name, Layla immediately asked in surprise, "Did he really mean that fat badger?" After that, she laughed loudly. But in fact, Kai heard this comparison perfectly well and also considered it funny, so he couldn't help but make a sound. The boy and the girl noticed this and assumed that it was just a cat that was running past. Meanwhile, Kai took all his will into a fist and stopped laughing. I thought about the fact that that count had a bad reputation because he chose exclusively innocent girls and treated them badly, but no one except that girl had ever dared to call him a fat badger. Meanwhile, Layla continued the topic of conversation and asked her brother if he had even introduced Rial, what the man had said. Lois suddenly smiled and asked what he could have said that made his beloved Layla so angry. Kai, meanwhile, having heard her name again and having recognized it completely, at that moment he understood what her name was, and this brought a smile to his face. The girl replied that in their city of Faller there were no balls or receptions, so there was practically nothing to do there. So she read and constantly read books, rode a horse, and planted plants. These were activities that brought pleasure. She was looking at the village children, and that's what she told him, because the man asked her what she liked to do in general. As soon as Kai heard about all these hobbies, he smiled again. He thought that this was really an atypical hobby for an aristocrat. Usually they don't even think about doing something like this, but Layla asked her brother if he could even imagine what that badger had said. He asked why women read books at all. He said that if the girls took care of their beauty, instead of such stupidity, they would definitely not be left without suitors. That's exactly what he told her. Kai immediately frowned upon hearing this. He thought that this was even worse than he expected from this person. Meanwhile, the brother asked whether she had simply listened to all this silently or whether she had actually taken some measures. Layla then immediately said that of course she did not tolerate all this. She replied that if he had read books and not assessed women's beauty, then at least he would have known how to conduct a conversation correctly. When she laughed and said that in the end, he just turned red and left. Brother also laughed, but he understood that this action could still have serious consequences, but he did not tell the girl about it. Kai also laughed at that moment. He thought that at first she didn't look very smart and clever, but in the end he was wrong, and she really could speak well. Then Layla told her brother that he didn't need to force himself to come and find her a groom. She didn't have one, not because they put the issue off while she was caring for her sick father. She didn't have a fiancé because she still hadn't met that right person. So even if she didn't meet him, she would just live with her brother Maleficent and the people from Folar. It was even better for her. Kai was surprised to hear that she was taking care of her father. He understood that it must have been painful to watch a family member get sick and how it was impossible to help him in any way. He remembered how his mother was ill and changed day by day, turning into just a body that could not even get out of bed. He knew that in such situations, a feeling of helplessness arose from the fact that nothing could be done to help the person you loved, and even your very essence dies with this person, and in order to protect himself, and not open his heart to anyone else, and not rejoice, and not be truly sad, he simply got rid of all emotions. The only emotions he allowed himself were anger and hostility, and still after so many years, he could not get out of this hell. That's why he was incredibly surprised by the fact that the girl could smile calmly and even be happy, although not much time had passed since her father's death. After this, he began to think about why he had listened to this whole meaningless conversation and why he had laughed. Then suddenly, after a short silence, the brother turned to his sister and asked what kind of person she had imagined next to her. Layla, hearing this question, was a little surprised because she had never seriously thought about it before. So she needed some time to think. Soon, she told her brother that she saw next to her a man who would not criticize her for reading and would not demand too much devotion. She saw someone who could send a chest of ash and feldspar full of gold coins to Kai, who was still standing nearby, heard this and immediately remembered. After this event, the next day he took the cards, and when the assistant came to him, he finally asked the will where the Folar lands were. The man, hearing this, was a little shocked and asked if he was talking about those Falars that only small feudal lords with that surname had. But Kai got angry and said that it was not the small feudal lord who asked where the lands of the barony of Folar were. Will at that moment thought that if you look at the map of Elmer's lands and discuss the inspection route on these lands, then of course it is impossible to immediately guess that he meant foreign lands, so I assumed that he was talking about feudal lords. Also, the guy did not understand at all what happened to Kai, because he was always so rude, but as soon as he returned from the ball, he became very easily irritated. He walked around the estate constantly with a gloomy face. The servants could not even look him in the eye because they knew that if they did so, they would only receive punishment. And even Kai was not outraged that he ended up bringing him to the ball, so he decided to fulfill his request and took the cards in his hands. He quickly looked them over and then pointed to a small island. He said that it was the eastern outskirts beyond the Killicourt. It was such a small place that he almost missed it. Seeing this, the Duke was a little surprised. He immediately began to carefully examine this area and everything that was around. His assistant at that moment asked why he suddenly became so interested in these lands, because it was unusual. He also, seeing the expression on Kai's face, said that it was as if he was going there to kill someone. But the man ignored all these questions and comments. He only asked his assistant how long the journey from their estate there would take. The guy thought seriously and said that in fact, he didn't know for sure that the cart would take about 3 days, but a good bed could get there in a day and a half. But it was still a long way. After this, Will suddenly raised his voice and asked the guy to at least give a reason and say what was wrong with him, why he became so suddenly interested in that area. But as soon as he saw the angry expression on Kai's face, he realized that it would be better for him not to ask about it anymore, and that he would not get an answer. Otherwise, his head would be cut off first. In fact, it's been 2 whole weeks since Kai attended the ball. There was nothing special about it, so of course a lot has been forgotten. Well, that girl he saw, and who had beautiful, shiny golden hair, just couldn't get out of his head. He just couldn't let her go. And of course, this constantly got on his nerves. He couldn't concentrate normally and think about anything else. Last week, he even attended receptions that he had no intention of attending, but he did not meet the Fowler brother and sister anywhere. And yet he came precisely because of this girl. Of course, the man was very disappointed because of this, even though he clearly noticed that the guy had been very strange lately. The man was very worried that this could be because he had pulled him towards the baller count against his will, and he also asked for forgiveness, saying that he really did not want it to have such an effect. It was also added that the guy soon showed up at receptions that he had never been interested in, but he didn't dance with the girls there, but simply stood and turned his head like a meerkat. He explained that at these events, he could have calmly denied the rumors about himself, but because of his behavior, they gradually became more credible, and people actually began to believe it all. Kai, hearing this, sighed heavily, and said that he had already told him at the very beginning that there was no need for this, and that this situation suited him. Will then asked if he really thought that it was only his desire. Of course, it was not so, because the imperial family put pressure on Elman so that the guy would finally marry the princess. And at the new ball, they will definitely again demand a clear answer from the man. Otherwise, the events will only get worse. Voli explained that if he refused them again, he would immediately ruin his relationship with the imperial family. And if he wanted to avoid problems, he simply needed to marry someone from another family. However, the assistant also added that the situation had become more complicated precisely because of Kai, who had no intention of changing the rumors that were circulating about him. The man, hearing that he needed to marry someone from another family, immediately became interested, and even more serious. He began to come up with a plan, and soon he suddenly stood up from his seat, saying that they needed to go to Uvoli. Having heard about this, he was sincerely amazed, and immediately asked where he was going to go. Well, Kai didn't explain anything to him, and they set off in a small group. After all, they arrived in that city at night, and the man, standing on the hill, saw how small he really was. Voli stopped next to the Duke and saw that he was not going to go anywhere further, and immediately asked what they needed to do next. In fact, he was very tired, because he couldn't even imagine that they would go on horseback. He thought that they would take a carriage, and that it would be much easier, but everything turned out completely differently. Kai then stroked his horse and said that everyone was already very tired, so they could stop for the night at a local hotel, and suggested going down to the city. As soon as they did this, they rented a room for themselves. Kai lay awake while Will and the other knights were already dreaming their 10th dreams. The guy couldn't sleep and kept thinking about how he should act next. Baron Faller hadn't even invited him, and he couldn't just show up on their doorstep. In his entire life, he had never acted so spontaneously as he did this time, and it was all because of a simple girl, and a rather strange one, and it was because of her that he behaved in the most reckless manner. For Kai, all this was very strange. This was not his usual behavior, and he did not know what was supposed to happen next. But soon he finally fell asleep. As soon as morning came, the guy woke up and was a little surprised he didn't even notice when he fell asleep. Then he sat up in bed and rubbed his neck. The beds in this hotel were not very comfortable. When he finally woke up, he went to the window and opened it to see that the city had already begun to live its own life. Even though it couldn't compare to the capital, this place was quite nice and cozy. Kai hadn't felt such comfort for a long time. He simply sat on the window and watched as people walked and talked to each other below. He was really interested in watching this, but anyway, he still needed to get to the Fuller estate to meet that girl, but he didn't know under what pretext he could go there. Of course, he couldn't just say that he came to see the lady. Besides, he wasn't even close in his relationship with the new Baron Fuller. Kai also understood that he could have mistakenly decided that he had feelings for his sister, and that would only add more problems to him, so he definitely couldn't do that. But at that moment, the man suddenly noticed that a carriage had pulled up not far from him, and from there a young girl in a modest dress and with golden hair came out. The girl looked around, and Kai, seeing her, immediately felt some trepidation in his chest. His eyes shone with joy because it was Layla, whom he so wanted to meet. Of course, he noticed her at the ball because of her uniqueness and even oddities. But for the entire 2 weeks, this girl did not leave his head and thoughts. He guessed that it was most likely due to the thought that they might never meet again, because rare things were valuable, regardless of their actual cost. So Kai assumed that he most likely just came to make sure that she was worthless. But when he watched how sweetly she treated the children, a soft smile involuntarily appeared on his face. I thought about how she called someone a fat badger, but she looked like a happy foal. At that moment, Layla called more children to her, and they sat down near the fountain. Then she took out a book that she had brought with her. In her beautiful, gentle voice, she told the children that on this day she would read them a story about a brave knight who defeated a dragon. Of course, Kai was interested all this time in how it was possible to make so many grimaces, because while the girl was reading, she showed various emotions and poses so that it would be much more interesting for the children. The man guessed that she probably honed her skills by reading books to children, and that then fully explained her active mime at the ball. As Layla was coming to the end of her story, one of the boys suddenly burst into tears and said that he suddenly felt very scared by this story, but she smiled happily and told him to come to her. She hugged him and began to calm him down, saying that everything was fine. It was just a made-up story from characters. Everything would definitely be fine. And in the meantime, he continued to sit on the windowsill and watched all this. He was incredibly interested in watching everything that Layla did. He thought about what he was looking at. He didn't understand why he couldn't take his eyes off her. Kai assumed that it was because she was different from the usual aristocrats, and therefore he was interested in just watching even her. In fact, he even blushed a little because of the feelings that overwhelmed him when he looked at her. When Layla looked in his direction, he became even more embarrassed. He thought that if anyone saw him, they would consider him strange, and he himself really hoped that even if she noticed him in the window, she would not recognize him. When he noticed that he was too overexcited, and the girl attracted him madly, of course, something like this sometimes happened to him. It was quite natural. But this time, he was surprised because no one had ever aroused sexual desire in him. The woman always tried to seduce him somehow, but he lived peacefully without any problems. But now, he did not understand how such an absurd situation could happen when he just looked at this simple girl. In the end, he had to do what was necessary in order to calm down. Meanwhile, he heard Layla continue reading the story to the children, and this attracted him even more. Something like this had not happened to him for a long time, and because the man had a fairly developed imagination, he could even imagine that the girl was in the same room with him. He continued to hear her beautiful voice which was coming from outside. While Kai was finishing his business there, his assistant was downstairs from the place where they stopped. He came for breakfast. There he was met by other people who lived in this hotel. When they saw the will and other knights, they immediately asked where they were all heading. Seeing their expensive uniform, they concluded that they were of high status, so they were really interested in learning about everything. Smiling happily, he said that they were from Fuller. As soon as the other men heard this, they were very surprised and asked why they had come all the way from there to this small village. When the will was asked this question, he said that in fact he himself did not know for sure. Then the guys began to talk among themselves and suggested that it could have been some kind of secret mission, and therefore the information was not disclosed. At that moment, Keiji quickly gathered his things, went down from the room, and turned to his assistant, shouting loudly, saying that they should have gone back already, so he asked him to get ready as soon as possible. The guy, who was just having breakfast, was very surprised to hear this. He said that they had come because of some personal matter of his, so why should they go back now, since he hadn't even had time to leave the room yet? However, Kai meanwhile bandaged his entire face with a special cape, because he still felt awkward about what happened and did not want anyone to see or recognize him. Voli, of course, noticing this, was very surprised and asked why he was so confused, because it was quite warm outside. But the Duke, of course, did not answer this question. Some time had passed since that trip, and Kai actually went to Fular quite often, so when he returned from there again, Volya met him. He asked if he had really gone to that area again. Kai, going inside and taking off his hood, said that it was exactly like that. He had been there. As soon as his assistant heard this, he was not shocked, because this was already the 6th time. And he also said that since he had already traveled, he should have at least done something. He did not understand the point of these trips at all if he just sat in the hotel the whole time. Voli also asked with a smile on his face whether the man had accidentally fallen in love with one of those Geminis from whom they had rented a room in the hotel. As soon as he saw Kai's reaction, he was amazed and immediately came closer to him and asked who interested him, the elder or the younger. But the man began to go up to his office. He asked his assistant to shut up. His head was hurting so much that he definitely didn't have the strength for all this. But Volya shouted at him and told him not to even dare to complain, because he and Uvalis were already on the verge of not understanding where he was constantly disappearing to and for what reasons he was going so far away. He also said that he would have returned at least before the imperial ball, because it was in honor of the princess's coming of age. But they couldn't even contact Kai, so the guy had to blush deeply in front of the emperor. He also added that the emperor had sent someone to check the estate, and Volya asked whether the duke even suspected how scared he and Uvalis were because of this. The imperial family clearly decided that he did not come because he did not want to get involved with the princess, and because of this, they were quite offended. Meanwhile, Kai was already in his office. He sat down, and his assistant asked if the man even understood what rumors were going around about him at that time. The Duke then suddenly asked what rumors he was talking about, since he had not heard anything like that since he had not even been interested. Then, Volya shouted and said that these rumors indicate that Kai likes men, and even that they had a secret romance. The man didn't show much interest in this, and only said that it was really unusual and unpleasant. But Volya continued to shout and said that now not only would Elman's family not be able to get engaged to anyone, but he also had to forget about marriage. Because of all these terrible rumors, even ladies were afraid to approach him. And so on, he decided to make a joke, and smiling said that this was wonderful, because this is exactly what he was trying to achieve. The assistant, hearing this, immediately became worried, and in a very stern voice, asked if this really meant that Kai really liked him. The Duke did not answer this. He only rang the bell, thereby calling the butler to his office. As soon as Wallace entered, he immediately asked why the man had called him, and the Duke explained that he needed him to prepare a chest made of a huge and strong ash tree. In fact, he asked for this to be done because he remembered very well what Layla had said about this. And so he also asked that the butler order each corner of it to be covered with feldspar decorations, and that the entire chest be filled with gold. Of course, the man, upon hearing this, was a little shocked, but he told the gentleman that he would do everything in the shortest possible time. Then the Duke looked at the will and told him to personally deliver this chest, along with a detachment of knights, right to the land of the Fullers. The guy, meanwhile, did not understand at all what was happening, so he decided to clarify with Kai directly and asked if he really had some kind of affair with those twins. He kept wanting to know who he was dating, the older or the younger. He asked the man to tell everything honestly. He was ready to understand and accept him, even knowing such personal information. But the Duke was already beginning to get angry, because Volya also began to think that he had an affair with two people at the same time. With a heavy sigh, Kai handed him the envelope and asked him to go not to the hotel, but to the Baron Falar's estate. The men were very shocked when they heard this, but Kai asked that this envelope and the chest be given to the Baron's sister Layla, as it was an engagement letter and a chest of gold for her. And when a whole month had passed since that moment, and the day came when Kai was finally supposed to meet his future wife for the first time, he was personally a little worried. The man put on his best outfit and was already ready when the butler came in and said that it was time to go because the girl was approaching. The man replied that everything was clear to him. He was wearing a rather nice black uniform and looked truly unforgettable. Uvalis also decided to cheer up his master a little and said that he looked great that day. The Duke did not react to this in any way. He simply walked past and went down to meet Layla. In fact, he visited the land of the Forlar for only one reason: to check whether his feelings for this girl were an accident and a fleeting phenomenon. And after the 6th check, he had no choice but to simply admit the fact that it was not a lie or a temporary phenomenon. Up until that moment, he had never felt any interest in one woman, but for some unknown reason, he was simply drawn to Glue, and he didn't know how he could explain it. But he just knew that he wanted to be with her. That day, the man met her near the carriage and helped her down. But noticing that she was falling, he realized that he could not allow this, so he tried with all his might to catch her, and he succeeded. That's when Kai found himself so close to the girl that his heart fluttered even more. He felt the heat on his face. She was truly beautiful. Layla was a little embarrassed at that moment. Her cheeks turned red, and she thanked Duke Elman for catching her and not letting her fall. The man then put her down on the ground with a cold expression on his face and thought that it was too dangerous. He shouldn't think about how beautiful she was, because those feelings could overwhelm him again. Then he decided to introduce himself. He greeted her in Elman's castle. Layla, of course, also bowed and greeted him, saying that it was an honor for her to be there. She said her name, and the man thought that this was too late for an introduction, because he had watched her more than once and knew perfectly well who she was. But the girl had no idea who he was. On the day when Layla decided to save her flower, the man was in his office, the windows of which overlooked the garden, where the girl was collecting soil for herself. For a while, Kai just watched all this, but after that, he asked the butler what she was doing at all. Olis replied that she was filling a flower pot with soil. Before that, the girl also asked where the most sunlight fell, and he showed exactly that place. The man, when he thought about the fact that these were people who were collecting a bouquet or drawing flowers, and she herself was digging the ground and planting seeds, began to be surprised by Layla even more and admire her. For him, such behavior of an aristocrat was really quite unusual, especially when he saw how calmly she reacted to a worm that she found in the ground. Usually, girls would not even touch that place. He suddenly became interested in how Layla would react if he suddenly came up to her and pulled her closer to him, hugging her around the waist. Also, after this, he will kiss her scarlet plump lips. He would like to know what will happen if he starts kissing her snow-white neck and chest. Even ordinary thoughts about this man made me feel very uneasy, because before the wedding, Layla could not be in the same building with him, but on the advice of the butler, he sent the girl to another building. Volya claimed that since ancient times in their country, absolute purity and innocence before marriage were valued. For this reason, spouses could not even be in the same building in order not to seduce each other. He was even very glad that it happened this way, because otherwise he would definitely not have been able to restrain himself from the feelings that he was experiencing, and would have committed an unacceptable rudeness while being near her room. That's when several months passed from that moment, and finally their wedding day arrived, and Kai was the happiest man on earth, even though he didn't show it much. As soon as the bride was led to the altar, The guests who had gathered immediately began to talk among themselves. They talked about how the head of the family, with the deepest history in the empire, had married so quickly. They did not think that this could happen instantly. People also discussed the fact that he immediately brought the bride to the estate to teach her social etiquette. And besides, the lady was very simple, from a provincial Beard family, and this embarrassed them a little. In general, it was believed that the Duke made such a decision because there was something wrong with him, and this was his only chance. They did not even consider the fact that he could truly fall in love with her. Many men even said that there was a high probability that Kai was a eunuch, and for this reason, they definitely did not envy this girl. Of course, the Duke heard all this information perfectly well and could not understand why these people were having so much fun, and even assumed that they could not be heard, although he heard everything perfectly well. Of course, he was not as offended for himself as for Layla, who had to hear all this. He assumed that she could take it seriously and even be offended. Well, the man thought that these rumors would soon disappear. He knelt down in front of his future wife and kissed her hand. Layla was in a beautiful, long wedding dress and with a small bouquet of flowers. And so when their wedding night arrived, Kai stood in front of the steps and thought about the fact that for the first time since inheriting the title, he had to go up there. This was the room of the Duke and Duchess, which was located on the 3rd floor. It is the largest and most luxurious room in the Elman Castle, with the best view from the window. And at the same time, it was in that room that his father made love to many women, and Kai had to watch and listen to all of this. Because of this, that room caused him incredible rejection and trauma. And it was also his mother's room, which she could not leave because of her aristocratic pride. She slowly faded away in it, hearing all the obscenities that her husband did while cheating on her. Kai approached the room, and for some time, he simply could not even open the door. He was physically simply rejected from this place. It was difficult for him to do all this, but he understood that he just needed to calm down and forget about all the problems. All this was in the past. The room was perfect from that moment, and even the interior was changed. And besides, he waited so long for that moment to finally meet his love, and when it came, the man felt like a coward. The first thing Kai did was simply open the door to the room, but only then did he think that he should have knocked, and when he saw Layla in such a transparent nightgown, his cheeks immediately turned red. The girl meanwhile became embarrassed and quickly began to cover her business with her hands, but then she looked at him with her beautiful blue eyes. Meanwhile, the Duke simply closed the door behind him. In fact, he often imagined Layla naked, but this ultimately exceeded all his expectations. He could not even imagine how perfect she was. Every inch of her body was incredibly beautiful, but he was even afraid to just talk to her for a while. When he entered the room, he felt very angry at himself. The man had been waiting for this moment for so long. In front of him was a naked body, which he had imagined in his head many times, how they made love and even just hugged. Now he had every right to caress every centimeter of her body as much as he wanted and not worry about other people's opinions. Just take into account her desires. But because of the too strong aroma, which filled the whole room, Kai's head was spinning. He felt a heaviness in his body, discomfort, and even nausea. He felt extremely terrible in that atmosphere. It was all similar to the feelings he experienced when he was in front of annoying women who did not give him even a break. Because of this, he even regretted that all this happened. As soon as the man passed by the mirror, Tom glanced past at Layla, who was already lying on the bed and waiting for him. He thought that this was not some other terrible woman in front of him. It was the same Layla with whom he fell in love at first sight. He did not understand why everything happened this way and why he was overcome by such negative feelings right now. He went to a small bedside table and turned off the light. Yes. He turned to Layla and saw that she was very uncomfortable. He kissed her on the lips and then realized that he definitely couldn't do this. Because of this, he became even more angry with himself. So he simply suggested that she sleep and wished her good night. Of course, for some time, Kai still had the hope that this happened only because of the excitement after the wedding. But over time, it turned into real despair because he did nothing to get closer to his wife. He ignored all these rumors and thought that he could handle this whole situation. But because of his arrogance, these rumors only spread more and became more terrible. Vol advised him to discuss this whole problem with Layla, and the man understood that he was right. It was better this way, but he did not want to see the upset expression on the girl's face. One fine day, the man went out into the yard to get some fresh air and clear his mind. And suddenly, Layla came up to him and turned to the Duke, who immediately turned around. The man looked in surprise at his wife, who was wearing a modest dress, but still just as charming. Layla smiled and said that she wanted to tell him something and asked if he had time for them to talk. In fact, a few hours before, Layla was still in the library studying some papers. She thought about all this for a while, but then she stood up from her seat and told Marie that this could not go on any longer. She needed to speak to the Duke in person. She could not put it off. Layla explained that they did not spend the first night, but at least he came to her bedroom. But after his escape, he has not appeared there for 5 days. She should have known what was happening to him and maybe even helped him. Marie actually thought about the fact that up until that moment, she had seen him hiding when the lady passed by. And this, of course, made her wary. Throughout these days, Layla was actively trying to understand the reason why everything happened this way. She wanted to satisfy her curiosity and eventually went to the library, where she was able to find even the oldest news. However, no matter how much she searched there was only basic information about Elman's family, and not a word was said about the man. And then Layla suddenly had one thought. She thought that they were, after all, spouses, and for some reason they had not discussed anything. Although this was wrong, she thought about it at that moment and concluded that since their wedding, they hadn't even really had conversations. The man was taciturn, and it was difficult for her to understand him, since he was from high society. But Layla didn't know what could be more difficult in such a situation, because she knew that her brother and Maleficent always talked when some conflicts or just misunderstandings arose. It was for this reason that she decided to follow the same tactics. The girl believed that this way she could get out of this situation and finally find out everything she needed. As soon as she headed to Kai's office, she saw Wally come out of there, and he immediately looked at the girl in surprise. The man greeted her and was about to ask something, but Layla greeted him back and said that they had not seen each other for a long time, and she was very glad to finally see him. The man smiled happily and asked if she had come to see the Duke. When the girl said that it was so, he replied that the man was not yet in the office at that time. As soon as Layla heard this, she became a little sad, but Uvali explained that he had gone out for a walk in the garden, and if the girl did not object, he could accompany her to that place. At that moment, her gaze immediately lit up. She was happy that she would still be able to find him and possibly discuss everything she wanted, so the girl agreed to his assistant's offer. Marie stayed at the estate because she had a few more things to do, and when Will and his mistress went outside, he asked if this was really the time they were talking for the first time after the wedding. The girl thought about it and then smiled and said that it was really like that. All this time the man was busy with various things, so they couldn't manage to cross paths and talk. Will explained that due to the rush to organize the ceremony, he was dealing with all the Duke's affairs. It was very sad that they were forced to go to inspect the estate without even having time to enjoy the banquet. But the girl, smiling, decided to cheer him up a little and said that, in fact, they had all worked very hard, and the ceremony had been magnificent. He smiled and said that he was very pleased to hear these words. But the Duke only used him and never praised him, so he was truly grateful. Then Layla asked if it was true that they were close to the Duke, since he was his cousin. Volya replied that it was something like that. He had been with him since he inherited the title. He also said that if a girl was interested in something, she could ask without any problems. He would answer everything. At that moment, Layla had many questions in her head. For example, why he refused the wedding night, as happened in other families. Was the information about the rumors true? Did he have a mistress, and why did he choose her? The girl really had a lot of questions, but she didn't know if she could ask them if she was only half his wife, so she decided to change the subject a little. Looking somewhere into the distance, she said that she remembered that during the ball, the Duke was constantly surrounded by people, and asked if it was true that he had many friends and girlfriends because he was so handsome and popular. There was always someone around him. At that moment, Will understood perfectly well that she was hinting that the man had a mistress. so he decided to immediately answer that aristocrats are always surrounded by many people, but the Duke could not stand high society, so all this was alien to him. He also explained that the guy was popular, but people really irritated him, and he irritated him even more because he introduced him to all sorts of social events and forced him to socialize. Hearing this, Layla immediately smiled. She could imagine how much effort it took to pull the Duke out. The man also said that Kai especially couldn't stand those who pursued their own selfish goals. He never saw him smile even next to attractive ladies who were truly interested. At that moment, Layla's cheeks suddenly turned a little red. She agreed with him and said that she had never seen a smile on his face, especially when there were other women around him. Vol, hearing this, was immediately surprised and asked what she was saying, but the girl had already seen that the Duke was nearby and said that she needed to go to him. Before that, she turned and said goodbye to Volya, saying that she really enjoyed talking to him and that she hoped that they would cross paths again soon and talk. Will himself really thought about the girl's words. Was the Duke really the man who was so incapable of expressing his emotions? After all, before he smiled quite often, but now he only frowned. When Layla approached the Duke, she said that she wanted to tell him something. The man immediately became wary and asked what had happened. He believed that something serious had happened. Layla herself thought about what she should start with and then finally came up with an idea, smiling. She said that she wanted to hold a tea party at the estate. The man, hearing about the tea party, was very surprised. But the girl explained that she had heard that everyone was waiting for the Duchess's first reception. She also said that she was putting it off because she was not yet mentally ready to welcome guests. But Madame de Fer told her that she was already very late, so she needed to accommodate him. At that moment, Kai felt very guilty because he knew that she was putting it off because of the failed first night, namely because of him. His look and voice became even more serious. He told her to do as she wanted, but the girl did not notice this tension and only smiled and thanked him for it. After that, she didn't go anywhere, and there was a rather tense and awkward silence between them, since they had run out of topics for conversation, and no one knew what to say. Kai decided to be the first to break the silence and asked what she had been doing while she was in her homeland. Despite the fact that he was already aware of all this, he decided that it would be a good idea to ask. Layla replied that she sometimes rode horses there and grew plants with her nanny. Of course, she mostly read books there, because she loved them very much. She and her best friend Maleficent lay under a tree and then had dinner together. As soon as the girl plunged into these memories, she immediately began to smile, and the man looked at her with a sad look and realized that she was really happy there. He realized that the more he heard about her peaceful life in the Follert, the more ashamed he felt of his desire to make her happier than anyone else. Your greed, he just took away from Layla her happiness that she had in her homeland with her brother and best friend. Because of this, he felt guilty and angry at himself. But Layla was actually happy because it was the first time she had finally talked to the Duke for so long. But when she looked at his face, she could not understand what he was feeling at that moment. She thought that perhaps the problem would be much easier to solve than she had imagined. And because of this, she was happy. So Layla decided to continue their conversations and ask the Duke what his childhood was like, since the estate was so big. She assumed that he probably had a lot to keep him occupied. At that moment, Kai immediately started remembering his childhood and that horrible room, so he knew he didn't want to tell all of it, and replied that, unlike her, he didn't have much to remember. As soon as the girl heard this, she immediately became a little sad. She asked if this was really true, but the man was not going to continue this topic of conversation. He simply turned around and started to leave, saying that the wind was very cold that day and she could catch a cold. So he said that it was best for her to just go inside, which made Layla even more upset. She couldn't believe that something she had so much hope for was quickly destroyed. But in the end, Layla shouldn't have hoped so much, because the Duke was an unpredictable person, and as it turned out, establishing contact with him was very difficult. For some time she stood in one place and watched as the leaves fell on the lake. And the man walked away from her, and he felt sad again. When several hours had passed since then, and Layla was taking a bath, Maria came to her and said that she had sent an invitation to tea as she had requested. She also said that the next day gifts were to be delivered for the noble ladies, so everything was arranged. Layla immediately smiled, thanked her, and said that she was great. Then Layla saw a small jar in her assistant's hands and asked if this was really new oil, and she decided to change it again. The girl actually wanted to tell her the truth, that it was not so. But the butler forced her to lie to the lady. He handed over this product and said that this was the Duke's request, so Marie just had to take care of it without any unnecessary questions. So she just smiled and said that everything was correct. It was lavender oil with other herbs. Some say that it calms the nerves, so she decided to bring it to Layla. The girl then looked somewhere to the side and asked if she still thought that oil could change anything. But the woman explained that it wasn't all for the first night. It was just that Layla had been so tired lately, so she assumed that this oil could at least smooth out her fatigue a little. Layla then smiled and asked if it was true that Maria did not know the truth about why she got married. The women were a little surprised and said that it seemed like the lady had said that it was difficult to refuse such an offer and all that sort of thing. The girl replied that at first it was like that. She agreed because she simply had no other choice. Her relatives were very worried because the Duke only needed his wife for show, in their opinion. But the strangest thing is that over time, Layla really began to expect a lot of things. She knew that love at first sight only happened in novels, but she realized that such an amazing man suddenly fell in love with her for such a fleeting meeting. Besides, she wanted to experience the same love that her parents and brother had with Maleficent, because they were truly happy people, and she wanted the same for herself. And she really thought that it would be very good if the Duke fell in love with her first, so she went to the estate much earlier than the wedding. And along the way, she constantly imagined his face, which she had seen only once at the event. And she still met the Duke from her fantasies, and ultimately realized that she fell in love first, although she really didn't want it to happen. Layla thought that she was like a fool, because he, in return, was not in love with her. Because of this, she would like to get rid of these feelings with all her might, and then it would not hurt her so much. After some time, Kai decided to call a doctor for himself because he really understood that his condition was not normal. But when the doctor examined him, he said that he was completely healthy. But even so, if a man is very nervous, then of course he would not be able to enjoy the night. So he suggested that Kai just rest calmly and not overwork himself. He looked at him with a very angry look, but did not answer, which made the doctor feel very uncomfortable. Not long after the silence, he suddenly stood up from his seat and told the doctor to leave immediately. The man began to walk away from the butler, meanwhile asking him to keep all this a secret because he definitely didn't need any new rumors. After the doctor left, Kai turned to his butler and said that he had told him that he was from a family of court doctors. In the end, the Duke heard the same thing from all the doctors. The butler asked him for forgiveness and said that he really thought they might say something different. Kai, on the recommendations of all these doctors, took Joptrevi, which were supposed to help stabilize his psychological and physical condition. He even lay on a soft bed all day long so that his body could rest properly. He asked Layla's maid to change her oils regularly. Of course, he understands that it was very rude of a man to interfere with her usual routine in the bathroom. But at that moment, the most important thing to him was to explain the reason for the incomprehensible situation with her, and not to watch his manners. Despite the fact that Kai had high expectations, things still didn't get any better. Every time he saw the girl, she caused him physical disgust. His biggest problem was that even just looking at the back of Layla's head, he remembered her beautiful body, and he had those strange feelings again. Even every time the guy heard her usual conversation with the maid, he immediately became excited, and therefore he had to do what he didn't want again and again. In the end, Kai even lost his appetite. Because of this, he couldn't even not kiss the girl or hug her, and not wanting to show all this to his wife, he simply began to run towards her, thinking that it would be easier for him. Of course, all this irritated him, because he did not want things to turn out this way for him. The butler himself began to notice that something was wrong with the gentleman. He had not seen Kai in such a critical condition for a long time. He was an outstanding young head of the family who restored his fortune and raised the pride of his family to its feet. Uvalis believed that perhaps he was having such problems now because of what he had experienced at an early age. He could not get rid of anxiety, trying to gain recognition from his family, did not trust anyone, and suspected absolutely everyone around him. Therefore, after a little more observation, the butler turned to the master and said that he would allow you to say something extra if you say it, but he simply could not remain silent and asked if Kai would like to simply tell the lady everything. He explained that there were many examples where marital problems were resolved through frank conversation, but Kai, upon hearing about this, immediately said that he would never do that. He turned away from his butler and said that this only happened to normal couples, and they were not so normal. At that moment, the Duke realized that he had been too hasty from the very beginning. He needed to at least meet her a few more times and get to know her in person. He made the mistake of acting too quickly, but even that didn't work out as he had planned. He sent her an ash chest filled with the gold she had spoken of. But in the end, it turned out that this marriage was built on status and wealth, and therefore the girl simply could not refuse. She had no choice. Some thought that she married for wealth and glory, and therefore mocked her, but in fact, he could not hold her back in any way. If she found out about his terrible problem, she would regret the marriage, just like his mother. Of course, he didn't want to allow this to happen to Layla, and thought that it would be better if all this was just a curse at the price of wiping off the face of the earth the man who was called his father. After some thought, the Duke asked Wallace to call the priest to the estate. He believed that this might be able to fix things, and so, several days passed from that moment, and Layla finally had the day when the Duchess's first tea party was to take place. But the girl felt completely devastated. She kept remembering the words of the headmaid and the Baroness about how she had to perform at least one of her duties properly. Madame Desvery recommended only 7 noble ladies with the greatest influence in Soviet society, and it was them, of course, that Layla invited to her place. This woman said that they would all be a huge support for Layla, but of course she also understood that these ladies were quite close to her. The girl was a little upset, but soon she decided to cheer herself up, realizing that she couldn't give in to spirit at such an important moment. On the contrary, she wanted to show them all that she could handle it and organize the best tea party. Therefore, soon, when she came to the gazebo to check if everything was ready, she was pleasantly surprised. The atmosphere around was calm and beautiful. The cups were impeccable, and the treats were very neat, but beautiful. Also, throughout the gazebo, there was a perfect arrangement of flowers. They were not too intrusive, but had a pleasant aroma. The gifts for the guests were also ready, so Layla was simply waiting for the arrival of the noble ladies in order to finally begin her tea party. But when some time had passed since that moment, the girl simply sat down on a chair and sighed heavily. Marie immediately noticed that she was very tired and asked if everything had really been that hard. The girl replied that it was exactly like that. She didn't understand why so much work was needed for just one tea party, and how socialite ladies generally cope with such important matters and a multitude of guests. Marie replied that they practiced quite often, so it was already a routine matter for them. Then the girl turned her gaze to the garden and again looked around the gazebo. She was sincerely glad that she had chosen this place for tea drinking because it was incredibly beautiful there. In the Foler, she certainly would not have been able to see something like this. Since it was a small, modest place, there were not many gardens there, but spacious fields for sowing crops. Then suddenly, the head maid came to her and addressed the lady. Her expression was very displeased, so Layla became a little worried. The head maid pointed to the small boxes she was holding in her hands and said that they were gifts for the guests from the Duke. Inside them were beautiful brooches. Layla, hearing about this, was very surprised. She picked up one of the boxes and said that she had already prepared the gifts and did not understand what they were for. There were still some more. The senior maid placed the decoration on the table and said that the Duke apparently decided that this was not enough. And with a sneer, she asked whether Layla thought it was rather strange to give just glass cups. Marie then began to defend Layla's honor and said that these were high-quality crystal wine glasses, custom-made by a famous craftsman, and asked what she could possibly know about such things. The main thing is that the maid, smiling faintly, replied that a commoner like her certainly couldn't figure all this out. For her, they were no different from the glasses in the kitchen, and that's why she said so. Then suddenly, Layla, looking at one of the decorations, turned to the maid and asked if the Duke had personally told her that her gifts were not enough. The maid suddenly became worried and hesitantly replied that of course he had not said so directly, but that was the impression she had. The girl closed the box with a contraction and said that it was strange because he was not that kind of person at all. So she also said that later she would personally ask the Duke what exactly was missing from her gifts. After that, she turned around and started walking towards the window, telling the maid to go now since she had already finished. And she didn't object. She smiled maliciously and said that it was really time for her to go. And after that, she left. She herself thought about the fact that she certainly could not know anything about the Duke, since she had not even spent the night with him. And besides, she was irritated by the fact that Layla boldly boasted about her position, which she did not like the most. Layla didn't worry too much about all this. She assumed that it was most likely just a formality, so she didn't hope for anything more from the Duke, because she was tired of being disappointed every time. Meanwhile, Kai was in his office and looked towards the garden. But because there were many plants around the gazebo, he couldn't see anything. This irritated him very much, because he wanted to look at Layla so much. But then suddenly, the butler came into his office and said that the priest had already arrived. He also said that the man was already waiting for him in the living room on the second floor. Kai replied that he understood everything and that he would come now. He looked out the window for a while longer, but then, sighing heavily, he went into the priest's room. His cheeks suddenly turned red, and he turned to the Uvalis and asked if he had given the gifts for Layla. The butler smiled and said that of course he did it through the head maid, and asked if he needed to check if everything was in order there. But Kai quickly said that this should not be done. And then the butler suddenly replied that with gifts, a man could show how much he cared for the lady. He explained that the noble ladies who come to the tea party will have a good impression from the first meeting, and they will definitely start to support the lady and even communicate with her. Kai thought about it, but soon agreed with him and said that the man was indeed right, although this did not make him any less nervous. There, he hoped that this ceremony with the priest would end as soon as possible, and went into the room where the man was already waiting for him. As soon as the priest saw Hertz, he smiled and said that he had heard that the man had summoned someone who had knowledge of magic and curses. Kai, sitting opposite him, said that everything was absolutely correct. That was exactly the kind of person he had called. Then the priest asked if he could find out the reason why the man had called this particular specialist. He became a little embarrassed, turned away from him, and said that he could not clearly name the reason. Otherwise, a lot of rumors would have spread that Elman had called the priest for a stupid reason. He asked to simply check whether some kind of curse or spell had been cast on him. The priest did not ask many more questions. He just smiled and said that he was ready to do this. But for this, it was necessary to prepare a small ritual. So they turned off the lights in the room, lit candles, and the man lit special incense. He approached Kai and began to whisper something. The guy was quite worried at the time, but when the priest finished his ceremony, he said that there were no curses or magic on the man. As soon as the Duke heard this, he was a little upset, but he told the priest that this was very good news, although it did not sound as cheerful as it should have been. After a short silence, the boy turned to the Duke and said that priests were obliged to listen to the believers' stories, but there was still something in common. For example, if these were torments not due to a curse or illness, then in most cases, it was the person's soul that suffered. The priest said that this soul could not be seen or understood, but if it was ignored, it could result in quite a big bang. He asked Kai to think carefully whether he had forgotten about some burden or had previously left it in his soul, because sometimes old wounds were much stronger than a curse and caused great discomfort in life. At that moment, Kai thought seriously about these words. He didn't know what he had forgotten, but it caused him quite a lot of concern. At that moment, the man suddenly noticed that the employee who had been in the room all this time suddenly began to leave. He was a little alarmed. He immediately approached the butler and said that usually the man was always very calm, but on this day he was completely different, especially after that question from the priest. He asked the butler if he was hiding something from him. He explained that he needed to know. The man's voice even trembled with excitement. He told the gentleman that he certainly had not hidden anything special, and that nothing like that had happened, but one could see concern on his face. Therefore, Kai replied that he himself could decide whether it was special or not. He also wondered if the man had forgotten that he was his master, and that he must obey him unquestioningly. The butler then sighed heavily and decided to tell him. He replied that it happened when Mr. Drake was still living in the estate. Someone committed suicide in the estate. As soon as Kai heard this, he was genuinely shocked by such information. He definitely didn't expect to hear it. Meanwhile, all the aristocrats had already arrived to see Layla. Of course, she had already gone out to meet them. As soon as we got out of the carriage, we immediately bowed, and one of them, with pink hair, said that it was an honor for them to receive an invitation from the Duchess of Elman, and they were glad to be there. The girl also bowed and greeted them, saying that she was also very glad to see them, but she herself felt how much she was worried, and even her facial muscles almost cramped. Then the aristocrat came closer to her and said that the mistress had been absent from the Elman residence for so long that she could not come to this place even if she wanted to. The woman asked Layla to invite her more often in the future, because she really liked this place. Other aristocrats began to compliment Layla. One of them said that even at the wedding, she thought that the Duchess had excellent taste, and another that the girl was beautifully dressed that day. The ladies said that the Duke was very lucky to find such a beautiful wife, because she looked like she had just stepped out of a painting. Also, one of them said that next time they should come visit them, but in fact the girls were so close that it even became a little difficult for her to breathe. So she simply suggested that they go to the gazebo to stand outside for a short time. As soon as they entered inside, they immediately sat down at the table and began to talk. And for these she said that she had heard that the new Villa Marquise de Versa was very luxurious. One of the aristocrats, having heard about this, was a little surprised and asked her wife to give them a tour. The girl smiled and replied that she would definitely send out an invitation. Meanwhile, Layla began to examine all the girls in the hall. The wife of the Marquis Devers's husband was present. It was precisely the same lady who was the first to greet her. Next to her sat the wife of Count Kester, and not far away was the wife of Count Tovarnel. But Layla was already at that moment not sure whether she remembered them all correctly. Because of this, she was very worried. In fact, she tried for so long to remember them all, but they all covered their mouths with the same gesture and even laughed in the same tone. Therefore, it was difficult for her to recognize and separate them at all. Also, during this tea party, everyone was actively talking to each other and discussing various topics, but they didn't really listen to each other. Everyone was trying to talk about their own things. There wasn't one specific topic. It somehow reminded Layla of their conversations with Maleficent when they were almost asleep. At that moment, the girl came to the conclusion that when people said that they had the most influence in social circles, now it meant that they were the most talkative ladies she had ever met. Then, suddenly, the girl asked Layla if the wife of the Marquis de Marquis had not received an invitation. As soon as Layla heard about this lady, she immediately asked who she was. But the aristocrat immediately smiled and said that the Duchess was probably not aware, since she had also only recently gotten married, and for this reason did not know everyone yet. Playley felt a little uncomfortable about this, but another girl asked if they were talking about Lady Oretta. Then the Duchess immediately thought about this name. She realized that she had heard about it somewhere before, and then suddenly she remembered that it was precisely about her that Madame de Sfere and the headmaid were talking when they mentioned that Lady Oretta was one of the Duke's many mistresses. Then one of the aristocrats continued the topic of this conversation and said that despite the fact that Oretta became the 5th wife of the Marquis de Marquis before she was called the flower of the secular world, she and the Duke were often dancing partners. Another noblewoman agreed with her and said that it was indeed so. She often saw them together. Layla became a little sad. It was very unpleasant for her to talk about it. Her hands even started shaking. She decided not to believe all these services about her husband until she herself could be absolutely sure of it. But for some reason, the girl began to worry and worry. Then Layla suddenly looked back and saw that Maria suddenly began to approach her. When the maid entered the gazebo, she turned to the lady and asked for forgiveness for taking up her precious time. But she just needed to look at something. Layla, hearing about this, was immediately surprised. She was interested, but what was she supposed to see? And another aristocrat, who was sitting next to her, immediately smiled happily and said that apparently she had urgent business. The girls immediately told her not to worry and to go faster, because perhaps it really was something important. One of the ladies even smiled and said that there was still plenty of time, and they could have fun themselves, while Layla sorted out her urgent matters. Then the Duchess stood up and walked over to Marie. She realized that it must really have been something incredibly urgent since her tea party had been interrupted. Then, before leaving, she asked the aristocrats for forgiveness and said that she would return as soon as possible. At that moment, Marie brought the Duchess to the estate and pointed to the broken glass that the girl had just prepared to give to the aristocrats. Seeing this, Layla was horrified and immediately asked the maid how this could have happened. Maria replied that the maid was cleaning the place and accidentally broke the glass, and also asked the mistress what they should do in such a case. Layla then thought about it, but the maid asked if they should not hope for the understanding of one of the ladies. For example, they could order a new one and send it to the estate a little later. But the girl immediately said that choosing just one person was not the best move for her reputation. It was definitely not the right thing to do. She explained to Maria that it would be best to say that the gifts had not yet arrived and to send them all at once when they received a new glass again. The maid, hearing about this decision, really thought that it was a good one and replied that they would go right away and order a new glass. Meanwhile, she became a little sad. Of course, she was happy that, instead of her gifts, she could give the Duke's gifts, but she was upset by the fact that she could not provide her prepared presents. Then Layla went outside and thought that she only needed to hold out for a few more hours until the wind stopped and she could finally rest. Layla also approached the gazebo and thought that they weren't really waiting for her there, so she didn't have to hurry. She thought that everything was fine until the laughter died down. Since Layla didn't even say anything there, she thought that they themselves would be more comfortable without her. She hid not far from the gazebo and thought that it was much calmer in this place. But then suddenly, she heard the voice of one of the aristocrats who called the Duchess poor, so the girl immediately became interested and began to listen more attentively. The girl said that no matter how much she wanted to, Layla would definitely not be able to do this since the Duke did not give her any hope in the future. As soon as Layla heard that the conversation had turned to the Duke and herself, she became very interested, but still could not understand what exactly they were talking about. She could hardly hear, but she was able to catch the phrase from the lady that the wife did not look very good. They were newlyweds, but they could not even spend their first wedding night. Also, another lady agreed, but did not say that the Duchess was probably very worried about this because it was really not normal. Layla was amazed that they were talking about her so openly at all. Then she came closer and heard one of the noblewomen say that the Duchess was extremely worried because she wanted it very much, but she could not do it with the Duke. Layla, hearing this, was sincerely amazed. Her face even turned red. She could not believe that we could discuss her personal life. Her hands began to tremble. She could not understand what was going on, but the aristocrats continued. One of them said that she took a bath for several hours, burned a psalm, and changed her bed linen. She even wore underwear that was typical mainly for mistresses. Every day she created chaos and exhausted the maids to death. The aristocrat also said that she also wastefully poured so many expensive oils into the bath that some said that it was impossible to even breathe because of the strong aroma. The other girl smiled and said that there was nothing that could be done about it. Some said that she was going to give up and just take a lover since nothing was working out with the Duke. Layla could not believe that even the most influential noble ladies knew about her unsuccessful first night and her constant efforts to seduce the Duke. She immediately wondered who could have told them about all this. First of all, of course, she assumed that it could have been the maids. But then, I thought that it could also have been the work of Madame Desfer, who recommended these very ladies for invitation. But she also did not exclude the senior maid who despised her. But then Layla began to wind herself up even more, and thought that everyone in that house could have done this because they hated her with all their souls. Because of this, she felt incredibly ashamed. The girl didn't even want to go back. She couldn't understand how she was supposed to look all these ladies in the face after that. Their looks weren't exactly friendly, but she never thought the girls would be able to mock her so openly as soon as she walked out the door. But then, suddenly, another lady, smiling happily, said that the Duchess herself was to blame. She sat in her wilderness and didn't even go into high society. And then suddenly, she dared to accept the offer of Duke Elman and did not even question it. She simply took and agreed to it. Another girl agreed with her and asked who was to blame that she now had to be a widow with a living husband. Other girls agreed with them and said that he was arrogant and haughty. He turned away so many socialite ladies and ultimately chose the most ordinary woman that could be met. Also, one of the aristocrats wondered if he had not suffered from this problem, the Fowler barony would have been able to arrange this marriage with the Duke of Elmar. They certainly doubted it. At that moment, Layla seriously thought about what was wrong with her family. Her grandfather was an outstanding scientist, and he was entrusted with teaching even the imperial family. He had always been respected on their lands. Her family, who had never harmed anyone and managed the lands wisely, suddenly became the subject of various unpleasant conversations and suffered such terrible treatment. Of course, Layla was not happy with this, because all this happened because of her marriage to the Duke of Elman, and she began to regret very much that this had happened at all. They found themselves in an even worse situation than if she had simply refused him, but Layla decided to shift her attention a little and thought about what the Duke's problem was, and they weren't talking about it, because she hadn't heard anything like that yet. But then suddenly, the aristocrat said that this marriage only confirmed everything from the very beginning. It was strange that the young man, an aristocrat of the upper class, who was able to get anyone, did not even touch any of the women. At that moment, Layla thought about the fact that they were thus hinting that he really did have some kind of mistress, since he had not touched any of his friends. The girl said that she still believed before that he was simply keeping his purity for that very lady. But her friend suddenly laughed and asked where she had ever seen a young duke who would do this. Of course, such a thing does not exist, and for this reason, all this aroused even more suspicion. Then, one of the baronesses asked if this really meant that Duke Elmena was protecting himself from his only wife. Of course, this was untrue and complete stupidity. Layla couldn't hold back at that moment and burst into tears. She thought that he could have had a mistress, but of course, she couldn't even imagine that he could neglect her so much. The girl had absolutely no idea what she was going to do with her life now. She didn't want to be a puppet in his hands, but she couldn't even imagine how to act in a different situation. Then one of the baronesses smiled and said that she still felt sorry for Duke Elman, because he was not ideal in everything, when she suddenly laughed and said that with such a beautiful height, incredible face, and pumped-up figure, being a eunuch is simply humiliating. At that moment, when Layla heard this, she was shocked. She did not understand how these girls could say such things. Then she couldn't stand it and immediately began to return back to the hall. She thought that the reason why he couldn't even hug her was because of some secret lover about what he ate. But Hana considered it crazy. That same evening, Kai sat in his office. He poured himself a glass of wine in order to rethink everything he had heard that day. In fact, the butler told him that someone had committed suicide in the estate, and Kai only wondered how many such people there were. In fact, his father once abused the wife of a knight loyal to their family while he was away from home. He pursued the daughter of a ruined aristocrat, promising to make her his second wife, and then simply abandoned her. This is exactly the kind of thing that the man who was called Kai's father did. One of the victims simply committed suicide, and Drake paid his family and sent them abroad so that no one would talk about it. At that moment, Kai wondered if the butler really said that he got rid of everything connected with the Drake, but he decided to keep quiet about it. It was hard for him to believe that such a secret had really been kept from him all this time. Wallace asked the man for forgiveness, but Kai then told him to continue telling because he saw that the man had not yet shared everything. Then the butler sighed heavily and said that it was the daughter of the nanny who raised Kai. The man, hearing about this, was immediately surprised and asked if he really was talking about Glottis. The butler sighed heavily and said that everything was correct. It was she who committed this terrible act in the estate. Kai couldn't believe that it was really true, because the nanny who was always so kind to him and her daughter, look, they were so close that he even regretted that they weren't one family. The colder his mother treated him, and the more disordered Drake's life became, the more the man believed and relied on these two people who sincerely valued and respected him. At that moment, Kai was amazed, because Gladys said that she wanted to get married. He gave her money and a house as a dowry. Even he could not understand when all this happened at all. Meanwhile, the butler replied that Miss Gladys had never married and had not left the estate all this time. The man also replied that this happened even before Kai became a duke, and the guy was even more amazed upon hearing this. In a trembling voice, he asked why he didn't know all this, why no one told him. Volus replied that the one who first discovered the corpse hanging in front of the marital bedroom was in fact Kai himself. The butler also said that the guy fainted due to shock and could not regain consciousness for a long time. After waking up, he simply did not remember anything. As soon as Kai heard this, he was very shocked and asked his assistant if he really told him that his memories were wrong. He said that it was simply impossible. He did not understand how this could happen, because he had never heard of anything like this from anyone before. Uvalis replied that he did not know the details, but he only knew that the day before, Mr. Drake had brought this girl into the bedroom. At that moment, Kai understood perfectly well what had happened there, and replied that apparently this meant that Trade had indeed committed violence against Gladys. The butler replied in a sad voice that he, of course, did not know all the details and particulars, and that only Mr. Volin could know the rest, so he advised him to contact him. The Duke, hearing about the wave, was sincerely amazed, but the butler explained that it was then that the gentleman stopped at the estate, and it was he who then investigated the whole matter. After this, Kai thought about this whole situation for a long time, and could not understand how he could have forgotten about something like this. When evening came, Layla was sitting in her bedroom. She was very upset. The girl did not even remember how the tea party ended and how she accompanied the guests. They left with smiles on their faces, as if they hadn't talked about her personal life behind her back. Ultimately, the girl realized that she never wanted to get involved with them again, because these individuals were extremely unpleasant to her. Layla then heard that one of the aristocrats said that if a man is not interested in women and does not eat, then he definitely prefers in choosing men. Another aristocrat agreed with her and said that, of course, men could not curb their sexual desire, and even if in old age sand is pouring off them, they will still look for ways to fulfill their needs. Then she said that they should take, for example, the Marquis de Marquis. After all, he can barely stand on his feet, and he took a young and beautiful Lady Lamon as his wife. Of course, Layla thought it was very stupid to say that men could not control their sexual desire. However, these words stuck in her head, and she now at least began to understand what kind of expression she constantly saw on the man's face. She assumed that he most likely regretted making her try so hard. Although the girl was doing this of her own free will, she could easily abandon this idea and thought. Layla understood that all this was a path to nowhere. Then suddenly, she also remembered how the girls talked about the fact that the words of Lady Lamono about the fact that he clearly, in the end, turns out to be true. The girl smiled and said that it was really so, and Retta herself told her about it and said that she had even seen it with her own eyes. The aristocrat also asked if they knew that there were rumors about their imminent wedding, but she never received a letter with a proposal. The lady became more and more worried, and over time, she began to receive fewer and fewer letters from other gentlemen of the nobility. The excited girl eventually entered the Duke's chambers at night, and when he fell asleep, she pulled down his pants. Lady Areto believed that this way she would be able to check everything reliably, and in the end, as soon as she did this, there was nothing there that should have been there. Everything was completely smooth. The other aristocrats, hearing about this, were very surprised, but the woman continued her story and said that, seeing this, she quickly ran out of there and in a hurry accepted the offer of the Marquis de Marquis. The woman also said then that no matter how high his position in the family was, she preferred an old man with non-working genitals to a man who had everything in order with this. Layla could not believe that Lady Lamon had escaped the fate of becoming the eunuch's wife, and that it was she, the uncouth girl from the village, who ended up becoming the eunuch's wife. But in the end, Layla became not the Duke's wife, the eunuch's wife, of course. Any man. He is not both a woman, not even if he is a eunuch. And since Kai did not do this, all her suspicions now became clear. The Duke of Elman went to bed with her every day for a whole month, but did not show any signs of attraction to the girl. Of course, Layla knew that there was no way to explain this, besides calling him a eunuch. For this reason, she was a little upset with the choice she had made and simply did not know what to do next. At that moment, the door to her room opened, and Maria came in and said to the lady that it was time to take a bath. The girl, hearing about this, immediately looked at the other ladies who were maids and brought all the necessary supplies. They looked rather unfriendly. She wondered who they were, if they were the ones who worried about what was going on in the bedroom. But Layla stood up and thought that there was no point in this, so she asked Maria not to add anything at all to the water, because she was tired of all these additional means of seduction. As soon as her maid heard about this request, she was of course very surprised. She asked what this girl was saying, but Layla then looked around and asked that the maid also bring her ordinary clothes for sleeping and not add any oils or incense anywhere. The girl said that tomorrow she was going to eat. As before, this was her final decision. Marie already wanted to tell her something, but the lady answered that she should stop this and just do what she was asked to do. Marie was certainly genuinely amazed, but in the end, she simply had to comply with the Duchess's request, so the girl finally took the bath the way she wanted. When it was all over, and Layla also put on a simple nightgown and lay down in a clean, fragrant bed, she was very happy. She thought that such rituals were much better for her than everything she had done before. Layla had already come to terms with the situation with the Duke and realized that now she could sleep peacefully and was no longer going to worry about whether a man would come to her for the night or not. Now she took absolutely everything from the blanket for herself and, having wrapped herself up, finally lay down on her soft pillow. When the girl began to analyze the past day again and remembered that the aristocrat also said that the Duke was very sorry that Lady Lamont was getting married. They assumed this because he sent her a luxurious necklace as a wedding gift, and because of it, the Marquis even scolded the poor girl very much. They assumed that despite the fact that he was a eunuch, he still wanted to get married and embrace a woman. Blood still could not deceive the past. After all, the Duke was quite the womanizer. They assumed that Kai was simply tired of his father, and so pretended to be noble. But apparently, he wanted to follow the same path and simply had no other choice. Layla, when she thought about all this, she realized that she didn't even know whether to believe all this or consider it a lie. An attempt to talk to him and find out at least something was of course not successful. He simply closed himself off and turned away from her again, which upset Layla a little. She thought that if he had only told her everything honestly, it would have been much easier. She was always ready to listen to him and understand, but for some reason he himself did not want this. Several hours passed since then, and Layla finally fell asleep. Then the door to her room opened, and the Duke walked in. Before he did this, while climbing the stairs, he thought about the whole situation. In fact, Kaigi always believed that Gladys lived happily somewhere there in a happy life. He considered her to be truly part of his family. He was too carefree and ended up even lying to himself because his brain couldn't handle all that torment and decided to just get rid of the information. But what upset him most of all, of course, was the fact that even after learning the truth, he still could not remember how he saw all this and managed to forget. The man also did not understand why Volin hid this from him. He assumed that he probably wanted Kai to gradually live in ignorance and not worry about all this. Until he returned from the domain, Kai would not be able to find out the answers to all these questions that worried him so much. But he still could not stop thinking about it. So he constantly played out various scenarios in his head. And at that moment, when he went up to the top floor, he realized that he needed to come to Layla. He decided that he needed to somehow justify himself. At least he found the key to solving the burden on his heart. So, shrouded in various heavy thoughts in his head, he went to her bedroom, and as soon as he began to approach this door, he again felt the heaviness on his chest. Every time he headed to the bedroom, he was enveloped in the suffocating smell that the man who was his father loved so much. Kai knew that he always enjoyed his torment, because he often called Kai to his bedroom with these terrible aromas and conducted conversations with him just like that. For example, one day he called a guy to him and said that no matter how much he thought about it, it was still strange that he had shared his bed with so many women, but none of them had ever gotten pregnant. The man did not understand how his mother could do this if other women could not. At the time this conversation took place, Kai was already older, but he asked his father what he wanted to tell him with this. The man sighed heavily, came closer to him, and said that he was just like his mother. He never understood jokes, and this constantly irritated him. His mother was a very boring person. He brought all these girls to teach her, but she was never able to understand and cope with it. The man smiled and said that Lady A was absolutely stupid in this regard, and his son was completely different from him, so this factor made the man very wary. The men explained that he was upset by the fact that Kay was absolutely completely like his mother in both character and even appearance. That's why the man gave the guy a chance to finally choose what he wanted. That day, the father brought especially valuable girls and asked Kai to simply take and prove that he was his son. But the guy then simply turned around and said that apparently there wasn't enough booze. He also added that he would tell the palace to bring him more and simply left. But then suddenly, his father said at the end that his face was certainly a little similar to his, but his behavior was absolutely not. Especially this look of the guy gave him away. The man said that no matter how he pretended to me, that it was not so deep inside. He of course despised him and hated him with all his soul, and it was quite obvious and visible. His father's brothers had the same look a little later. He was also going to send Kai one gift. And after that, he closed the doors behind him. The man said that this gift was definitely something that Kai would like for this reason. He told the guy to look forward to it. Eventually, Drake disappeared. But even so, it was like he was some kind of parasite sitting in the Kia all this time, and did not destroy his essence from within. The man always wondered when his nightmare and suffering would finally come to an end, because no matter how hard he tried, he could not get rid of it. When he entered the room, he felt a familiar and rather warm aroma coming from there. Kai was amazed. In the end, the man, having entered the room, lay down next to the girl and fell asleep. And then he had a rather strange, but very pleasant dream for him. The man dreamed that he entered a room, and Layla was sitting there in a beautiful, modest dress, and she was still just as delightfully beautiful. He then came closer to her and asked what she was doing in that place, because he did not expect to meet her. Well, Layla at that moment smiled, looked away from him, and said that in this place he definitely had nothing to worry about. He could finally relax. The man, hearing this, was very surprised and asked what she was talking about, but the girl then asked in a gentle voice if he was now ready to hug her. Kai immediately asked what she meant. Then the girl looked down. The man followed her and saw that traces of arousal appeared on his body. He quickly turned away from her and could not believe that he was no different from a simple beast. He could not even restrain himself near her. He immediately asked Layla for forgiveness, saying that he still had no right to even stand next to her, and he could not hug her in such an unworthy place. He explained that they had to spend the first night in the marital bedroom, but Layla then took his hand and told him that everything was fine, and he didn't have to worry about anything. These were the lands that they both liked so much. So in this place, they could just be themselves. So I moved closer to Layla and finally kissed her. It was a wonderful, passionate kiss that he really liked. In fact, because he was dreaming all this and the man was a little overexcited, he made rather strange sounds, from which Layla, who was lying next to him, woke up. She immediately blushed. The girl turned back to check what those sounds were, and then saw the Duke lying next to her, breathing heavily. This struck her very much. She sat up in bed and watched for some time as he slept restlessly. The girl tried to understand when he had even managed to come, since she had not noticed him or heard him enter, much less lie down next to her. In fact, she didn't even expect to see him, so she couldn't guess that the Duke could have made these sounds. But now it made her feel even more awkward. The girl looked at the man, whose whole face was red, and she also didn't understand why he was constantly moaning. She even suggested that something was hurting him and that he was feeling bad because of it. She assumed that perhaps he was cold. She had wrapped herself entirely in a blanket and had not even given it to him, so Layla gradually began to take off her blanket in order to share it with him. But at that moment, she suddenly smelled the aroma of grapes next to him and assumed that he must have just gotten very drunk. The girl was so worried about this whole situation that happened to her, and because of their tense relationship and he just calmly drank and did not think about anything. Of course, this made her angry. And besides, he was quite calm even when drunk. When he slept restlessly, he still looked handsome, and this embarrassed Layla a little. Although it was a strange proposal of marriage that she received even without knowing this man, she did not understand when these fleeting feelings were able to take hold in her so strongly. The man who proposed to her and hid the fact that he was a eunuch, for whom her entire family was being insulted and her married life was becoming completely desperate, she somehow just went and fell in love with him. Layla understood perfectly well that for her own well-being, she should have just taken and hated him, but still her sympathy turned out to be much brighter than hatred for this man, even after everything he had done. She thought that she was a complete idiot, because even though he was a eunuch, he could still get sick, and so she decided to cover him with a blanket anyway, so that this would not happen. Then she saw that he had some kind of stick closer to his lower abdomen. She assumed that it was a sword for self-defense. For this reason, Layla assumed that it would be very uncomfortable for him to sleep with a sword between his legs, and reached out to get it. As soon as the girl did this, she felt that it began to move. Because of this, she became very scared, and then suddenly realized what it meant. Meanwhile, Kaiju became completely uncomfortable, so he reached his hand down to his stomach. The girl immediately covered herself with a blanket, and realized that this was exactly the thing that Maleficent told her about. Her whole face turned red, and she felt very ashamed, and eventually realized that it was not a sword for self-defense at all. Then, Layla wondered why her friend compared this thing to a key, because it was even bigger than the rolling pin that the nanny used to roll out the dough. She became scared and thought about the fact that this thing really should have entered the woman's body. But then she thought about the fact that there were rumors that he was a eunuch, and everyone thought so. But she was not sure whether such people should have this thing. All this time, she was thinking about it. And then, suddenly, Layla felt the Duke move closer to her. He was too close and continued to breathe heavily. The girl just felt him behind her, and then felt that her lower abdomen became very warm. It was strange because she had never experienced such feelings before. Then Layla realized that the man had stopped even more unrestrainedly. She also felt quite pleased, despite the fact that they were still separated by clothes. Then Layla suddenly let out a rather loud groan and immediately covered her mouth with her hand. She felt very awkward, but for some reason, she simply could not restrain herself. Between her legs, everything was as if on fire. It was quite ticklish and pleasant. At the same time, the man continued to do what he was doing, and Layla really liked it. But at some point, he suddenly stopped. Kai woke up, stood up from his seat, and said in a quiet voice that he had gone completely crazy. The man began to leave the room, and as soon as he did so, Layla immediately sat up on the bed. She still did not understand what had happened, but she came to the full realization that Duke Elman had no problems with arousal in this matter. But then she did not understand why he refused to spend the first wedding night with her. The girl thought that something was wrong with her, but these thoughts completely filled her head, and she really wanted to know what happened. When the next morning came, the girl first went to the library to get a few more books. She was very focused and stern. Marie, who was accompanying her, noticed that the lady was rather strange that day. She had eaten poorly and spent the entire morning in the library reading books. She was looking for medical reference books, which she usually never touched, and this made the maid very wary since she had already begun to think about everything bad. And besides, she felt how the air around her was heating up from the anger that Layla was feeling, so she didn't even ask her about anything in more detail, since she understood that the girl was clearly not in a state to tell anything. She had already even drunk all the tea, so Maria noticed that she needed to brew a new one so that it would be ready in case of anything. So she turned to the lady, but Layla did not answer right away. When the girl came closer, she suddenly closed the can and put it down on the table with a bang, asking what the reason was then. She was irritated by the fact that not a single book wrote about why men with normal genitals refused to have intimate contact with her. Layla understood that in this way she would either simply die of curiosity or burst from anger and also die. All this irritated her very much. Therefore, the girl, completely ignoring Marie, who was behind her, simply began to leave the library. She thought that she didn't care at all about the need to save face as a noble lady. She had a right to know why the man was treating her this way, and she was going to find out everything. The Duchess went out into the courtyard and thought that most likely he was in the office most of the time. He was certainly busy with work. Then she noticed that he was in the library, which was located under his office, and Mr. Volley was with him. She heard that he was leaving on an inspection and was very surprised that he was already at the estate because she did not know when he had managed to return. She looked at these men and wondered who would look at them and think that they were cousins. The Duke, for whom everything was difficult, and the Lord, who was kind to absolutely everyone, and outwardly they were not at all similar. They were complete opposites in everything. She also thought about the fact that the servants love the will very much, and with such a character one can get along even with a cold duke, so it is not surprising that they are together quite often. Layla decided that she would go to Kai after Mr. Vole left. It would be much safer. But then suddenly she noticed that some movements began to occur there. She noticed how the Duke suddenly took his friend by the shoulder, and he grabbed him from behind. Seeing this, Layla was simply horrified. She could not believe that this was really happening. At that moment, she immediately remembered the words of the aristocrats, that if a man is not interested in women and is not a eunuch, then he is definitely interested in men. She didn't understand why. At that very moment, she suddenly remembered the words of these ladies. It made her very wary. She knew that the Duke did not engage in intimate affairs with a woman and was not a eunuch, and these two guys were as close as brothers. Layla suggested that the Duke had preferences in choosing men and that he was also close to his cousin. For her, this news was simply astonishing. No matter how much it seemed to her that it wasn't so, Layla couldn't believe that something like this could actually happen in reality, and especially with the man she married. She assumed that he most likely just started to fall, and Will caught him so that he would not get hurt or hit himself. Of course, with such a share, she did not understand anything at all, so she could not make any judgments. She understood that despite the fact that the Duke was cold and not particularly talkative, and sometimes even irritated her greatly, he was still not the kind of person who could deceive Layla like that and treat her terribly. Layla was very hopeless. She started to cry and really hoped that it would not be true. But at that moment, she suddenly saw how the assistant began to grab him by the hair and assumed that they were kissing there. In fact, she had already seen a similar scene once. It was where she and the Duke first crossed paths. The woman and the man hid from prying eyes and actively kissed. It was not an easy kiss at all, but a kiss that was filled with desire and attraction to each other. They were ready to undress each other at that very second. The man then came to the girl at the Wall of Adam, put her hands around his neck. They madly desired each other and could not tear themselves away, even for a second. And now, when she was watching the Duke, she realized that these men were now also in a similar position, and this, of course, made her wary. At that moment, Layla suddenly remembered the words of Will that said that he had been next to the Duke since the moment he inherited the title, and also that she had never seen him smile, even around attractive ladies. But Layla was still haunted by the incident that happened last night, how he pressed himself against her and breathed heavily. At that moment, it became very difficult for her to breathe. She felt strong irritation and even betrayal. She assumed that that night, the Duke simply saw a dream with the Lord of Will, and therefore did it next to her. Of course, Layla involuntarily looked at the one who didn't even want to hug her. She had never really held a grudge against anyone, but now everything was different. When the girl heard talk about him being a eunuch, she got angry and hated him, but on the other hand, she even felt a little sorry for the man. But not now. Now she felt betrayed by Kai, and for this reason, she simply could not watch everything that was happening. Then the window in the library, she turned around and began to leave. When Layla returned to her office, she immediately wrote a letter to her brother and Maleficent. She said that she missed them incredibly much. At the same time, the girl continued to cry all the time. She thought that there was no longer any need for this. They could scold her for her selfishness, but she could no longer tolerate it. Layla, when she finished writing the letter, handed it to Marie, and with tears in her eyes, asked the girl to send this letter as soon as possible to her brother. It was very important. At that moment, I clearly decided for myself that I wanted to return to the Fuller, and I understood that I simply had no other choice. That evening, when Kai was next to Lily, he quickly woke up and realized that it was just a dream. but he was surprised by the fact that he somehow managed to come to her bedroom at all. He was very alarmed by the fact that he came to her drunk, and also saw this terrible dream lying right next to Layla. He left the room and thought that if she saw him in such a state, he would definitely have samples. He also thought about the fact that he really was the worst husband in the world. But before he walked out the door, he looked at the sleeping Layla and thought that even despite all this, she was quite cute, and that heady smell he usually experienced when entering the bedroom finally became weaker, and he assumed it was because she was wrapped in a blanket and the aromatic oils were not as noticeable. He thought that Layla just needed to wait a little longer so that he could make that dream come true. He had to have a proper talk with Volya, who was supposed to return in the morning. When morning came, he returned from his trip. He was very glad that he was finally home. I immediately thought about going to my room first and lying in the bath for a long time in order to wash off the dirt from this trip. And in the evening, he was going to go to his favorite bar and dance with a beautiful girl. All these thoughts made him admire him, and he couldn't wait to do all this. And then suddenly, Will looked to the side and saw that the Duke was starting to approach them. This made him very wary, because he looked completely unhappy. He thought that Kai probably came out to meet and greet him. However, as soon as he approached the Will, he grabbed him by the hand and without explaining a word, began to lead him to the estate. As soon as they entered the library, the man immediately started yelling at him. I asked the Duke what had happened. No matter how urgent the matter was for me, he thought that the man could have given him at least a little rest. But Kai replied that if he wanted to leave as soon as possible, he should have told him everything in detail. But he did not understand at all what was being discussed, and immediately asked what he wanted to know at all. Then the Duke asked him to tell him about the Glotus. He wanted to know everything. Vol, hearing about this, was very surprised. He looked at the Duke and immediately asked why he suddenly decided to ask about this. But Kai wondered if his assistant was really going to continue pretending that he knew absolutely nothing about this. But in order to prevent this from happening, he replied that he had quit and had already said that he knew everything. The guy had no choice but to accept this situation, and he asked if Kai had finally regained his memory and remembered all the events. The man replied that of course this did not happen, otherwise he would not have asked about it. After that, he explained to his assistant that he believed that the reason he had not yet been able to spend his wedding night was precisely because of those memories and events. So he had to know everything. Then, after a short silence, he suddenly asked, "Really?" Even though their marriage was not based on love, nothing had changed for them during all this time while he was gone. But the man did not understand at all what was at stake in this whole situation, Gladys, and why he needed to know about it. Kai got very angry when he heard this, and immediately asked why the guy decided that their marriage was without love. His assistant replied that he thought it could not be otherwise with the Duke, and also asked whether it was wise to marry a woman with whom he had not even exchanged greetings, but had immediately simply proposed marriage to her. That's why he thought that the first night hadn't happened yet because of the lack of feelings. Kai suddenly screamed and said that of course it wasn't like that, he just really couldn't do it. He explained to the man that something was happening to him every time he entered the bedroom. Layla had done everything in preparation for the wedding night, but he couldn't even stand on his feet properly in the bedroom. And if he ran out into the corridor, unable to bear it all, he would see illusions with the Drake and would simply begin to choke because of it. It was so painful that he simply had to drown out all these feelings and illusions with alcohol. Because of this, he began to drink often lately. Vol, having heard about this, sincerely began to feel for the Duke. In fact, he did not know that the man was experiencing all these difficulties. And Kai, meanwhile, answered him that all the doctors said that physically everything was fine. The problem was precisely in his head.